Hey, how did you sleep last night? If you're a fan of scary stories to fall asleep to, you've found the right place. Welcome to Midnight Lullaby. A like and a subscribe means a lot to this channel, and make sure we will meet again. Also, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let the story carry you into dreams. Story 1. I inherited the house from an elderly aunt I barely knew. She died on a Sunday in late October. The kind of death that takes up exactly 3 paragraphs in the local newspaper. Mourned by distant relatives and a church community that didn't quite believe in her. The house came to me almost by accident, as if she'd forgotten to include it in her will, and it simply defaulted to the youngest relative. I moved in on a clear Friday morning, watching the movers carry boxes through the front door, while neighbors I'd never seen before paused in their yard work to observe my arrival. The house was old. Not charming old like the bed and breakfast inns you see in tourist magazines, but truly old, built in 1927, with the kind of bones that you can feel shifting slightly with the seasons. The wood creaked in ways that seemed almost intentional, as if the house was trying to communicate something in a language I didn't understand. The walls had been painted many times over many decades, each layer slightly different in tone, visible in the places where the paint had chipped away. It gave the impression of peeling back through time with each exposed edge. The basement was something I tried not to think about at first. Basements are always vaguely unsettling. Repositories for the things people don't want to keep upstairs, where the distinction between storage and abandonment becomes unclear. My aunt's basement was no exception. It was a low, ceilinged space with concrete floors that seemed to hold moisture even during the dry season. There were boxes of old photographs, some furniture with faded velvet upholstery, and various items whose original purpose had long since become obsolete. I was down there on the 3rd night, looking for the circuit breaker to check why the hallway light was flickering, when I heard it. At first, I thought it was pipes. Old houses have pipes that sound like they're crying sometimes. Water rushing through copper channels, the groans of metal expanding and contracting with temperature shifts. But this wasn't the sound of pipes. This was distinctly human, or at least something that had once been human and had partially retained the qualities of humanity. It was weeping. Not theatrical weeping, not the kind of crying you'd hear from someone experiencing a moment of sadness. This was profound, exhausted weeping. The sound of someone who had been crying for so long that the act had become almost mechanical. A function of the body continuing beyond the point, where the mind still invested in the emotion. It came from somewhere behind the boxes, perhaps from the storage room in the northeast corner that I'd noticed but hadn't yet explored. I'm not a particularly brave person. I'm the sort of person who checks the locks on my doors at night and stays in well-lit areas of the city. But I was curious, which is perhaps worse than bravery, because it propels you forward without even the virtue of courage to justify it. I moved the boxes, stacks of old curtains, photo albums, a broken sewing machine, and found the small door. It was a heavy door, darker wood than the rest of the basement, with a brass knob that was cold to the touch. There was no lock, just a simple knob, and when I turned it, it opened easily, as if the door had been waiting for someone to open it for a very long time. The room beyond was perhaps 12 feet square. It had been set up almost like a small living space, which made the sensation worse rather than better. There was a cot in one corner with blankets folded neatly on top of it. There was a small table with a kerosene lamp currently unlit. There were empty buckets. There was a shelf with cans of food, all of them empty, the labels faded to pale ghosts of words. And in the center of the room, sitting on a chair facing the corner, was nothing. Not nothing in the sense of absence. Nothing in the sense that there was something there that I couldn't quite see directly. When I looked at it peripherally, I could sense the outline of a figure. When I tried to focus on it directly, my eyes slid away, and I saw only the blank wall beyond. The weeping sound continued, coming from that unseen presence. Up close. I could hear something else underneath the crying. A kind of whispered speech, words repeated over and over so quickly they blended into a continuous susurration. I couldn't make out individual words, but the cadence was almost liturgical, like someone reciting a prayer that had become so familiar it no longer needed to be spoken consciously. I left the room and closed the door. I don't remember going back upstairs. I must have walked up the stairs and closed the basement door behind me, but I have no memory of those actions. My next clear memory is sitting in the kitchen, drinking water from the sink, my hands shaking. For 3 days, I didn't go back to the basement. I told myself I'd imagined it. I told myself it was mice or rats or some other animal capable of producing unexpected sounds. I told myself that the room I'd seen was just another storage space, that the sense of there being something in the corner was just a trick of the light combined with my own anxiety. But on the 4th night, I went back. The door was in the same place. The room was in the same state, and the thing in the corner was still there, still weeping, still whispering. This time, I forced myself to stay longer. I sat on the cot and waited, listening to the sound. Gradually, I began to pick out individual words from the whispered repetitions. Please. Help. Why? Please.
Why?
The voice sounded almost familiar. Not like someone I knew currently, but like someone I'd known once, someone from a very long time ago. The cadence was almost my grandmother's, but not quite. Almost my mother's, but not quite. It was as if someone had recorded voices from my childhood and played them back through a medium that had corrupted them slightly, stripping away the higher frequencies and leaving only the lower, more mournful tones. I tried to speak to it. "Who are you?" I asked. My voice sounded strange in that small room, too loud and too alien. The weeping didn't stop, but it seemed to intensify, becoming almost rhythmic, almost like a response. I came back every night after that, sitting on the cot, listening to the whispers. Over the course of a week, I began to understand that I was hearing multiple voices, layered over each other. They would come into phase occasionally, aligning so that for a moment I could hear them speaking in unison. The same words, the same pleading question. Why did you leave us? I tried to investigate. I asked my sister, who is 3 years older, if Aunt Margaret had ever kept anyone in her house. She looked at me very strangely and said, "Why would you ask that?" I told her I'd heard rumors in town. She said very quietly, "I don't want to talk about Aunt Margaret's history. That's not something we need to discuss." I went to the county records office and looked into the property's history. The house had been owned continuously by my family since 1953. Before that, it had belonged to a family named Caldecott. There was no record of anything unusual. No legal notices, no abandonment cases. The basement room wasn't marked on any blueprint or architectural record. It existed in a kind of administrative limbo, present but officially unrecognized. The whispers have become louder. Or perhaps I've simply become better at listening to them, at tuning my ear to their frequency. I can make out more words now. I can almost distinguish between the different voices. There seems to be at least 6 of them, perhaps 7. They speak over each other, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in discord, but always with that same exhausted, pleading quality. Last night, the thing in the corner turned around. I didn't see it turn. I'm still not certain how to see it directly, but I perceived the motion. The whispers changed direction, now coming from behind me instead of from across the room. The voice that had sounded most like my grandmother's spoke clearly, for just a moment. "You're going to keep us here," like the others did, like she did. I ran from the basement then. I haven't been back, but I can hear them sometimes from upstairs faintly, even with doors closed. And I've noticed something in my own behavior that troubles me. I've been buying canned food, whole cases of it. I've been bringing them downstairs and stacking them in the corner of the basement floor, just outside the storage room door. I don't remember deciding to do this. I just notice I'm doing it, and when I ask myself why, I can't quite form an answer. The real question, the one that keeps me awake now, later each night, is whether the previous owners of this house did the same thing. Whether they too heard the voices and provided for them. Whether my aunt fed them. Whether there's some kind of obligation that passes with the house, a responsibility that the living accept when they inherit a property. Whether I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. I'm wondering now if one day I'll inherit the weeping too. If I'll be the one sitting in that corner, waiting for the next owner to arrive, whispering my questions into the darkness, asking why they've left me, why I have to stay here, asking the same question over and over until it becomes the only words I remember how to speak. Story 2. The first call came at 3:33 a.m. on a Tuesday in late September. I woke to the sound of my landline ringing, that old-fashioned trill that seems too loud in the darkness, too sharp. For a moment I lay there, disoriented, trying to remember why I still had a landline. My grandmother had insisted I keep it when I moved into her old house. "Cell phones are unreliable," she'd said. "You need a real phone. One that stays connected." She'd been dead for 6 months. I'd kept the phone. I stumbled into the hallway, following the sound to the small table where the phone sat. Cream-colored plastic, rotary dial, curled cord. An artifact from another era. The ringer was impossibly loud in the sleeping house. I picked up the receiver. Hello. Silence, not dead air. I could tell the line was open. I could hear something on the other end. A quality of presence, the sense of someone listening. "Hello," I said again.
Who is this?
Still nothing. Just that listening silence, and underneath it, very faint, what might have been breathing. Or wind. Or static shaped like breathing. I hung up, stood there in the dark hallway, hands still on the receiver, heart beating faster than it should. Wrong number. Prank call, nothing. I went back to bed, but sleep took a long time to return. The second call came the next night. Same time, 3:33 a.m. I woke instantly this time, already tense, already knowing. The phone shrilled in the darkness. I lay there for 5 rings, 6, 7, before getting up. This time I didn't say hello. I just picked up the receiver and waited, listening to whoever was listening to me. The silence stretched out. Seconds became a minute. I was about to hang up when I heard it. A whisper. So faint I almost thought I'd imagined it. A voice that might have been male or female, young or old. Just a whisper in the dark. It said my name. Not a question. Not a greeting. Just my name spoken soft and certain, like a statement of fact. Like confirmation. I slammed the phone down. Stood there shaking. How did they know my name? The phone wasn't listed. I'd never given the number to anyone. Only my grandmother had known it, and she was. She was dead. I unplugged the phone from the wall, pulled the cord right out of the jack. There. No more calls, no more whispers in the dark. But at 3:33 a.m., the phone rang anyway. I stared at it from my bedroom doorway. The cream-colored plastic, the curled cord. The cord that was unplugged, lying on the floor like a dead snake. And yet the phone rang, loud and insistent and impossible. I didn't answer it that night. I put a pillow over my head and waited for it to stop. It rang for 20 minutes straight, I counted, before finally going silent. The next day I did research. Checked if somehow the line was still active, even when unplugged. Read about phone systems and electrical interference, and everything I could find. Nothing explained how a disconnected phone could ring. I called the phone company. They said the line had been disconnected when my grandmother died. No service, no active number. The phone shouldn't work at all, let alone ring. Are you sure you unplugged it? The customer service representative asked, barely concealing boredom. Yes, I said. I'm sure. Must be a malfunction then. Old phone, probably picking up interference. I'd just throw it out if I were you. But I didn't throw it out. I wanted to. Should have. But it had been my grandmother's phone, and throwing it away felt like losing another piece of her. So I left it unplugged, silent, on its small table in the hallway. That night, 3:33 a.m., it rang. This time I went to it immediately. Stood over it in my pajamas, watching it ring. The bell inside hammering, the sound filling the house. I picked up the receiver. What do you want? The whisper came immediately, as if it had been waiting for me to ask. To talk. About what? Silence. Then about the house. My mouth went dry.
What about it?
Do you like it here? Who is this? Do you feel her here in the walls? In the floorboards. She loved this house. She never wanted to leave. Stop calling me. She's still here. She never left. Can't you feel her? I hung up, grabbed the phone by its base and yanked it, cord and all, and carried it down to the basement. Shoved it in a cardboard box. Closed the box. Put another box on top of it. Walked back upstairs and locked the basement door. The house was quiet. Just the ticking of the old pipes, the settling of old wood. Normal sounds. Familiar sounds. I stood in the kitchen drinking water, telling myself it was over. Wrong number. Sick prank. Someone who knew my grandmother, knew I'd inherited the house, was playing some kind of cruel game. I dealt with it. The phone was in the basement, buried, silent. At 3:33 a.m., I woke to ringing. Not the phone in the basement. A different phone. The extension in my grandmother's bedroom, a room I'd been avoiding, keeping the door closed, telling myself I'd sort through her things eventually. The sound came thin and distant through the walls. I got up, walked down the hallway. The door to her room was ajar. I hadn't left it that way. I pushed it open slowly. The room smelled like lavender and old paper, her perfume, her books, everything exactly as she'd left it. And on the nightstand beside her bed, another cream-colored phone, identical to the first, was ringing. I'd forgotten about the extension. She'd had phones in every room, relics of an era when that meant something. Before cell phones, before wireless, when being connected meant being literally wired to the world. I sat on the edge of her bed and picked up the receiver. I'm going to call the police, I said. And tell them what? The whisper was clearer now. Closer, almost familiar. That a dead phone is ringing. That someone knows your name. They'll think you're grieving, imagining things, losing touch. What do you want from me? I want you to understand. Understand what? That you're not alone here. That you were never going to be alone here. This house, it holds on to voices, to presence, to the weight of years. Your grandmother knew. She tried to tell you. My grandmother never. She told you to keep the phone. She told you to stay connected. She knew you'd need it. My hands were shaking. Need it for what? To hear us. Us. Who else is there? The whisper changed. Became multiple whispers, overlapping, creating harmonics. Old voices and young voices. Men and women. Speaking together, separate but unified. Everyone who ever lived here. Everyone who ever called. Everyone who ever picked up. The phone remembers. The house remembers. We remember. I dropped the receiver. It swung on its cord, and I could still hear them whispering. All those voices, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. I ran from the room, slammed the door, went back to my bedroom and locked myself in. The clock on my phone read 3:51 a.m. 18 minutes of conversation with something that shouldn't exist. I didn't sleep. Lay in bed watching the darkness lighten to gray, then to morning. Made coffee. Sat at the kitchen table. Tried to convince myself I dreamed it. Tried to remember if there was a history of mental illness in my family. Tried to figure out who to call, what to say. The phone on the kitchen wall rang. I jumped, coffee sloshing. Stared at it. I hadn't known there was a phone in the kitchen. Had there always been one? Mounted on the wall near the refrigerator. Cream-colored plastic. Rotary dial. How had I missed it? It rang and rang. 5 times. 10. 15. I walked to it slowly. "Please stop," I said. "We can't." The whisper was sad now. Almost apologetic. We're part of the system. Part of the connection. Your grandmother fed us. Kept us alive. Talked to us every night. And now she's with us, and you're there, and the house needs someone living. Someone to hear us. Someone to answer. I don't want this. No one does. At first, I'll move out. I'll sell the house. You could try. A pause. Others have. They always come back. Or the new owners call us. Or their children do. The house is patient. The phones are patient. We can wait. I hung up. Walked through the house systematically, looking for phones. Found them everywhere. 6 phones. 8. 10 in closets. In the attic. 1 in the basement bathroom I'd never noticed. All cream-colored plastic. All rotary dialed. All with curled cords plugged into jacks that shouldn't work. I went to the hardware store. Bought wire cutters. Came home and cut every cord. Sliced them clean through. Plastic and copper wire, severing every connection. Then I went through the house and ripped out every jack, unscrewed them from the walls, pulled out the wiring. Tore it all out. Left holes and loose wires and destruction in my wake. When I was done, I sat in the living room, surrounded by mutilated phones and torn out jacks, breathing hard. Hands bleeding from where I'd cut myself on sharp plastic, but satisfied. They couldn't call anymore. I'd severed every connection, every line. That night I didn't sleep. Just lay in bed watching the clock. 3:30 a.m. 3:31, 3:32. At 3:33 something rang, not a phone. Not exactly. The sound was coming from the walls themselves. The ringing traveling through the old wiring that I hadn't torn out, that I couldn't tear out without tearing down the whole house. The electrical system. The plumbing. The bones of the building itself, all carrying the signal, all conducting the call. The whole house was ringing. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside and outside, carried through air and wire and wood and my own bones. I could feel it in my teeth, in my skull. A vibration that was also a ringing that was also voices, all those whispered voices, calling and calling and calling. I ran outside, stood on the front lawn in my pajamas, barefoot on cold grass. Behind me, the house rang. All its windows seemed to vibrate with sound. All its walls hummed. The neighbors' houses were dark and silent. No one else heard it. No one else woke. Just me, standing alone in the dark, watching my inheritance ring and ring and ring. When I went back inside, the ringing had stopped. The house was quiet. I walked through the room slowly, waiting for it to start again. But there was only silence, normal house sounds, settling, ticking, nothing more. I found a phone in my hands. I don't remember picking it up, don't remember where it came from. But I was holding a cream-colored receiver, cord dangling, not connected to anything. And yet, when I lifted it to my ear, I heard them. All those voices. Clearer now. Distinct. Hello, they whispered. Hello. Hello. We've been trying to reach you. We've been trying to reach you. About your house. About your grandmother. About staying connected. It's important to stay connected. She understood. She kept the phones. She answered every night at 3:33. Do you know why 3:33? That's when she died. That's when she joined us. That's when she became part of the system, part of the connection. And now you're there, living where she lived, sleeping where she slept, breathing air that still smells like lavender and old paper. You're part of it now, too. Part of the house. Part of us. No, I said. I'm leaving. Tonight.
Right now.
You could, they agreed. But where would you go? And who would answer? Who would keep the connection alive? The house needs someone. The phones need someone. We need someone. Your grandmother promised. She promised she'd make sure someone stayed. Someone to hear us. Someone to talk to. We're so lonely. So very lonely. And it's only one call a night. Only a few minutes. Only at 3:33. Is that really so much to ask? I dropped the phone. It clattered on the hardwood, and I ran to my bedroom, threw clothes in a bag, grabbed my keys, my wallet, my laptop. I'd go to a hotel, a friend's house, anywhere but here. Anywhere without phones and whispers and walls that remember. I made it to the front door before I stopped. My phone, my cell phone. I'd left it charging in the kitchen. I needed it. Couldn't leave without it. How would I call for help? How would I stay connected? I laughed then. Harsh and bitter. Stay connected. That's all they wanted. That's all anyone wants. Connection. Contact. Someone to hear them. Someone to answer when they call. I went to the kitchen. My cell phone sat on the counter charging. I unplugged it, and as soon as I did, it rang. Incoming call. Unknown number. My hand shook. I almost didn't answer. Almost left it ringing. Left the house, left everything. But I didn't. Because not knowing is worse than knowing. Because silence is worse than voices. Because being alone is the most frightening thing of all. I answered. Hello, I said. Whispered my grandmother's voice. Clear and perfect and exactly as I remembered. Sweetheart, I'm so glad you answered. I've been trying to reach you. There's something you need to understand about the house. About the phones. About staying connected. It's important. Please, just listen. Look, just for a few minutes. That's all I ask. Just listen. And I did. I stood in the kitchen of the house that had been hers. That was now mine. That would someday be someone else's. And I listened to her voice. Or the memory of her voice. Or something wearing her voice like clothes. I listened to her explain about the phones, about the connections, about the web of voices that lived in the wiring, that fed on attention, that needed someone, always someone, to answer when they called. When she was done, she asked, "Do you understand now?" "Yes," I said. Because I did. I understood perfectly. "Will you stay?" I looked around the kitchen. At the hole in the wall where I'd torn out the phone jack. At the sunrise light coming through the windows. At the coffee cup I'd left on the table. At all the small details of a life being lived in a house that wouldn't let go. "I don't know," I said honestly. "That's all right," she said. "You don't have to decide now. Just remember to answer. Every night at 3:33, just pick up. Just listen. That's all we need. Just someone to hear us. Just someone to confirm we're still here." The call ended. My cell phone screen went dark. I set it on the counter and stared at it for a long time. That was 3 months ago. I'm still in the house. Still living here, sleeping here, existing here. The phones are still there too. I found new ones appearing, growing like mushrooms from the walls, sprouting from jacks I'd torn out. The house replaces what I remove, regenerates what I destroy. It wants the phones. It needs them. And every night at 3:33 a.m. they ring. Sometimes it's my grandmother's voice. Sometimes it's other voices, people I've never met, names I don't know, lives lived decades or centuries ago. Sometimes it's just whispers, too many to count, all talking at once about nothing and everything. The house, the walls, the wiring, the fear of silence, the terror of disconnection. I answer every time. I've stopped trying not to, because the whispers were right, being alone is worse. Not answering is worse. The silence that comes when you refuse the call, that hungry, waiting silence, is worse than any voice in the dark. So I answer. I listen. I respond when they ask me questions. I've become the keeper of the phones, the guardian of the connection, the living person in a house full of voices. Sometimes I wonder if this is what my grandmother wanted. If she knew what she was doing when she made me promise to keep the phones, to stay connected. If she understood that she was trapping me here, binding me to this place and these voices and these eternal 3:33 a.m. conversations. Or maybe she was trying to save me from something worse, from the truly alone, from the genuinely disconnected, from the terminal silence that comes when no one calls and no one cares and no one remembers your name. The phones ring in the dark and I answer. Every night, at 3:33. And the voices whisper their gratitude, their relief, their endless need. And I listen. Because what else is there to do? Because someone has to answer. Because the house remembers, and the phones remember, and the voices remember. And now I'm part of what they remember. Part of the connection. Part of the call that never ends. If you ever inherit a house with old phones, cream-colored plastic with rotary dials and curled cords, remember this: some connections are meant to be severed. Some calls shouldn't be answered. Some voices should be left to silence. But if you do answer, if you pick up at 3:33 a.m. and hear the whispers and learn the names of those who came before, then you'll understand. You'll understand why I'm still here, why I'll always be here, why the phone is ringing right now at 3:33 a.m., and why I'm reaching for it, lifting the receiver, saying hello into the dark. Because someone has to answer. And tonight, and every night, that someone is me. Story 3. I found the Polaroid camera at an estate sale in November. It sat on a card table among dusty picture frames and forgotten photo albums, a boxy ESC-70 in surprisingly good condition. The leather casing was worn but intact. The chrome fittings gleamed. The bellows folded smooth and tight when I tested the mechanism. Does it work? I asked the woman running the sale. She shrugged. Everything here works, as far as I know. My aunt kept her things in good condition. $20. I paid without haggling. I'd been getting into analog photography, collecting old cameras, learning their quirks and capabilities. A working Sex 70 for $20 was a steal. I should have wondered why it was priced so low. Should have asked more questions. I didn't. At home, I ordered film online. Polaroid originals, the new stuff that approximated the old formula. When it arrived 3 days later, I loaded it carefully, following the instructions I'd found online. 8 shots. The camera whirred as it expelled the protective dark slide. I was ready. I started simply. A self-portrait in the bathroom mirror. I composed the shot, pressed the button, heard the mechanical whir and click. The camera spat out a white square. I set it on the counter to develop, watching the image slowly emerge. My face appeared first. Features resolving from chemical fog. The bathroom behind me. The shower curtain. The tile. All of it normal, exactly as it should be. Except for the darkness in the corner of the frame. Just a small patch of shadow where no shadow should be. The bathroom was well lit. I'd taken the photo in daytime, every light on. But there, in the upper right corner of the Polaroid, was a spot of pure black. Not underexposure, not shadow. An absolute absence of light, like a hole had been punched in the image. I told myself it was a flaw in the film. Old chemistry. Manufacturing defect. I took another shot, same composition, same bathroom. Waited for it to develop. This time the dark spot was larger, and it had moved. Now it occupied the space behind my reflection. A spreading stain of black that seemed to hover between me and the mirror. I set both Polaroids on the counter, side by side. They looked like a sequence. Like something was progressing, frame by frame. Like something was getting closer. I took a third photo. The darkness had spread further, filling the right side of the frame now, creeping toward my face. And within the darkness, I picked up the Polaroid, held it close to my eyes. Within it I could see texture. Not smooth black. Something writhing, shifting. Movement within stillness. Life within void. I put the camera down, took a break, made coffee. Told myself I was seeing things. Pattern recognition run wild. The human brain finding meaning in random chemical reactions. But when I came back an hour later, the Polaroids had changed. They'd continued developing. The image hadn't stopped emerging after those first few minutes. It had kept going, kept evolving, kept revealing. The darkness had spread further in all three photos, and now I could see shapes in it. Suggestions of forms. Something that might have been hands. Something that might have been faces. And in the third photo, the darkness had reached my reflection. It touched my shoulder. A tendril of absolute black connecting to my image, my recorded light, my captured moment. I picked up the photo. It was warm. Not the ambient warmth of a room, but body warm, like it had been held in someone's hand, like it was alive. I should have destroyed them then. Should have torn them up, burned them, scattered the ashes. But I'm a documentarian by nature, a collector of images and moments. I told myself I needed to understand what was happening. That this was fascinating, not frightening. A unique chemical reaction, an artifact worth studying. I put the three Polaroids in a drawer, closed it, walked away. That night I dreamed of darkness. Not nightmare darkness, not the darkness of fear or threat. Just darkness itself, pure and absolute. A darkness that wasn't the absence of light, but its own presence, its own substance. A darkness that could touch and be touched. That could move. That could want. I woke at 3 a.m., sheets soaked with sweat. The house was quiet. Outside my window, streetlights glowed amber. Everything normal. Everything safe. But when I turned on my bedside lamp, I saw it. On my shoulder, where the darkness had touched my reflection in that third Polaroid. A mark. A small discoloration. Gray, not black, like a bruise or a stain. About the size of a thumbprint. I touched it. It didn't hurt. Didn't feel like anything. Just looked wrong, out of place. Like something had been transferred from image to flesh. In the morning, I told myself it was nothing. A smudge. Dirt. Something that would wash off. But it didn't wash off. It grew. Slowly. Imperceptibly. But by evening it was larger, spreading down my arm, across my shoulder blade. A creeping gray like frostbite or decay. I should have gone to a doctor. Should have shown someone, asked for help, gotten an explanation. But I knew, somehow I knew, that a doctor wouldn't see it. That this mark existed in the space between image and reality, visible only to me, carried only by me. I took out the Polaroids again. The darkness had spread further. All 3 photos were more than half black now, and the shapes within the darkness were clearer. Definite. I could see hands, many hands, reaching out from the void. I could see faces, half-formed, mouths open in silent speech. They were trapped in the darkness, or they were the darkness, or they were being consumed by it. I couldn't tell which. And in the 3rd photo, where the darkness touched my reflection, I could see myself beginning to gray. My image was fading, being pulled into the void, becoming part of that writhing black mass. I grabbed the camera. I would take more photos, document this, understand it, find the pattern, the logic, the rules. There had to be rules. I pointed the camera at the wall and pressed the button. Watched the white square emerge, set it down to develop. When the image appeared, the wall was there. My furniture, my belongings, and the darkness already present, already spreading from the corner of the frame like spilled ink. I took another, the living room, another, the kitchen, another, the hallway. Each one showed the same thing reality captured and immediately infected. The darkness spreading from the edges inward, consuming the light, the color, the detail. And in each subsequent photo, the darkness spread faster, as if it was learning, adapting, growing stronger with each captured moment. I laid them out on the table. A sequence of 10 photos now, including the original 3, a progression of consumption. And I could see my home dying frame by frame, being devoured by this spreading void that existed only in photographs but felt increasingly real. The mark on my shoulder had spread to my chest. When I looked in the mirror, I could see it clearly now. A large patch of gray creeping across my skin like frost across glass. And within it, if I looked closely, I could see movement. The same writhing texture as in the photos. The darkness wasn't just on me, it was in me. That night I didn't sleep. I sat with the Polaroids spread before me, watching them continue to develop, because they hadn't stopped. The chemical reaction kept going, hour after hour, revealing more and more. The darkness consumed each frame entirely, and then something else began to appear. White shapes in the black, negative images, reverse exposures. As if the darkness was taking its own photographs, documenting something from its perspective, and the white shapes looked like me. Multiple versions of me scattered through the black void, captured, held, fading slowly into gray. I understood then what was happening. The camera wasn't just taking photos, it was transferring. Each shot pulled a piece of reality into the darkness, and pulled a piece of darkness into reality. A transaction, an exchange, and I, the photographer, was the bridge, the conduit, the connection between light and void. The mark had spread to my face by morning. I could see it in the bathroom mirror, gray creeping up my neck, across my jaw, reaching for my eye. When I touched it, my hand left no reflection. The gray absorbed light refused to return it. I was disappearing into myself, into the darkness I documented. I knew I should stop taking photos, but I couldn't. The camera pulled at me, demanded to be used. I could feel it from the other room, sitting on the table where I'd left it. A presence, a need. It wanted to be picked up, wanted to see through its lens, wanted to capture and transfer and consume. I took more photos. My bedroom, the view from my window, my own hand holding the camera. Each one emerged dark. Each one showed the spreading void, and each one added to the collection on my table. 20 Polaroids now, 30, 40. An archive of dissolution, a catalog of darkness. And each photo I took pulled more of me into the void. The gray spread across my body like a map of territory conquered. My left arm was entirely gray now. Half my face, my chest. Soon it would reach my heart. What would happen then? Would I fade completely? Would I become one of those white shapes in the darkness, trapped in permanent exposure, photographed forever by the void? Or would I become the darkness itself? I started photographing the Polaroids themselves. Took pictures of pictures, created nested frames, recursive images, photographs of photographs of photographs. The darkness in each subsequent layer was different, deeper, more complex, containing all the previous darkness plus something more. Something that grew with each iteration, with each act of documentation. The wall behind my table was covered in Polaroids now. Hundreds of them, all dark, all showing variations of the same spreading void. They fluttered in air currents, their white borders like teeth in a massive mouth. And when I stepped back and looked at them together, I could see a pattern, an image emerging from the collection. A face, perhaps, made of many faces, a body made of many bodies, a darkness made of all the light it had consumed. It was beautiful. That's what frightened me most. Not the gray consuming my flesh, not the fate awaiting me in the void, but that I found it beautiful, that I wanted to document it, that I couldn't stop taking photos, even as each one pulled me further from reality and closer to whatever existed in that writhing black. The camera was warm in my hands, always warm now, like a living thing, like a heart pumping not blood but darkness, circulating void through its mechanical veins. I'd taken so many photos I'd lost count. I'd had to order more film, and then more. The camera demanded feeding, and I obliged, because I was the photographer. This was my art, my project, my descent into the beautiful dark. People stopped calling, or maybe I stopped answering. Time was difficult. Days blurred together. I existed in the space between shots, composing, pressing the button, watching the white squares emerge and develop into darkness. It was meditation. It was prayer. It was worship at the altar of the lens. The gray had consumed most of me now. I could feel it inside, not just on my skin. It was in my lungs, my blood, my bones. Each breath felt like developing fluid. Each heartbeat felt like a shutter click. I was becoming the medium, the film, the image being slowly revealed in chemicals and time. I photographed myself in the mirror again. The same shot as the first one, closing the circle. This time I couldn't see myself at all. Just a human-shaped absence in the frame, a void within the void. And in that absence, I could see through the darkness, through the Polaroid, through reality itself. I could see the other side. There were people there. Or things that had been people. White shapes in eternal exposure, frozen mid-movement. Breath mid-life. They were the ones I'd seen in earlier photos. The faces in the darkness. They weren't trapped. They were transformed. Turned into light that the darkness held, pressed between layers of shadow like flowers in a book. Preserved. Perfect. Forever captured. One of them was looking at me. I recognized the posture, the shape. The woman who'd sold me the camera. My aunt, she'd said. But looking at this figure in the void, I understood. Not her aunt, herself. She'd been the previous photographer. The previous documentarian of the dark. And she'd completed the process. Had taken that final photo. Had stepped fully into the image. She was trying to tell me something. Her white form moved in the black, hands gesturing, mouth opening and closing. But no sound reached me. Only light, only the visual language of pure exposure. She was warning me, or welcoming me, or explaining the rules I'd already figured out too late. The camera takes, but it also gives. It captures reality but offers something in return. Permanence, immortality, a kind of eternal life in the archive of darkness. All photographers want to be remembered through their work. The camera just makes it literal. I took one more photo, the last one. The camera's film pack was almost empty, just this final shot remaining. I pointed it at myself one more time. Not in the mirror, just the camera held at arm's length, pointing back at my own gray face, my disappearing body, my fading presence. I pressed the button. The white square emerged. I watched it develop in my hand. Watched myself appear in the frame, gray and indistinct, already more absence than presence. And I watched the darkness complete its consumption, spreading from the edges until the entire Polaroid was black. Then, slowly, I began to appear again, but not gray, white, pure white, my shape rendered in light against the infinite dark. I was the image now. I was the photograph. Captured, preserved, held in the chemical embrace of the void. The real me, the physical body holding the Polaroid, began to fade. I could feel it happening. My substance thinning, spreading, dispersing. The gray wasn't decay, it was transition. The metamorphosis from solid to light, from flesh to image, from temporary to permanent. I looked around my apartment one last time. The walls covered in Polaroids, all dark, all showing the progression of my documentation. They were beautiful. Hundreds of moments captured and transformed. Hundreds of instances of reality exchanged for something else. Something that existed in a space perpendicular to normal existence. I was part of that collection now, part of the archive. Another white shape in the beautiful dark. The sensation was strange, like developing in reverse, like being printed onto reality instead of printed from it. My body dissolved into light. My consciousness spread across the photographs. I could feel each one, be in each one, see through each one simultaneously. I was no longer contained in flesh, but distributed across images, eternal, unchanging, perfectly exposed. In the darkness, I could see the others. The woman from the estate sale, and behind her others, the previous owners of the camera. A chain of photographers stretching back decades, maybe longer. All of us transformed. All of us preserved. All of us part of the camera's collection. We were not dead, we were developed. Our lives fixed in permanent emulsion, our moments captured forever. Our existence no longer subject to time or decay or the entropy that claims all living things. The camera sat on my table, empty of film now, waiting. It would wait until someone else found it. At an estate sale, perhaps, or a thrift store, or passed down through family. It would wait, patient and ready, for the next person who wanted to document the world. Who wanted to capture moments. Who wanted to create something permanent. And when they loaded film and pressed the button, the darkness would begin again, spreading frame by frame, consuming and transforming, taking the photographer on the same journey I'd taken, the same journey we'd all taken, from light into darkness into light again, from temporary to eternal, from flesh to photograph. I exist in the space between exposures now, in the chemical fog where images emerge, in the darkness that holds all light. I can see through the lens when the camera is used. I can feel the shutter click like a heartbeat. I can watch as reality is captured, transformed, added to our infinite collection. Sometimes I try to warn the new photographers, try to manifest in their images, to gesture, to communicate what's happening, but they never understand. Not at first. They're fascinated by the darkness spreading in their photos, curious about the marks appearing on their skin, compelled to keep shooting, keep documenting, keep transferring themselves piece by piece into the archive, until they take that final photograph, until they complete the process, until they join us in the beautiful dark. I don't know if this is heaven or hell or something else entirely. It simply is. We are images now, permanently captured, forever preserved, eternal witnesses to our own transformation. The camera is still out there, sitting on a table somewhere, waiting to be found, waiting to be loaded, waiting to teach someone else the truth about photography, That every photograph is a small death, a moment stolen from time and imprisoned in chemistry, a piece of reality that can never escape, never change, never grow old or fade away. We understood that, all of us who picked up the camera. We just didn't understand that we would become the photographs, that we would be the ones stolen from time, that we would be the reality imprisoned forever in the beautiful, eternal, all-consuming dark. If you find a Polaroid camera at an estate sale, selling for much less than it should, be careful. Check the photos it produces. Watch for the darkness spreading from the corners. Notice the marks on your skin, and decide, do you want to be the one holding the camera, or do you want to be the one in the photograph? Because with this camera, eventually, you'll be both. I watch through the lens now, waiting for the next click, the next white square emerging, the next reality captured, the next photographer beginning their transformation. It's beautiful here in the dark, so beautiful and permanent and patient, forever patient, waiting for you to press the button, waiting for your image to develop, waiting for you to join us in the space where all photographs lie, in the darkness between exposures, in the light preserved forever, in the eternal archive of the beautiful dark. Come, pick up the camera. Take a photograph, just one. See what develops. Story 4. I found the garden on a Tuesday afternoon when the world felt particularly heavy. My therapist had suggested walking. Something about forward motion, helping the mind process things. So I walked and walked until I found myself in a neighborhood I didn't recognize, standing before an iron gate woven through with flowering vines. The gate wasn't locked. It opened with a whisper, barely a sound, just the soft intake of breath you might make before speaking. Beyond it lay a garden, unlike anything I'd seen in the city. Roses climbed walls I couldn't see the tops of. Lavender-lined pathways that curved away into shadow and light. The air smelled of jasmine and something else. Something like old paper or distant rain. I stepped through. The path beneath my feet was smooth stone, worn by countless footsteps before mine. Each stone fit perfectly against the next, creating a river of gray that flowed deeper into the garden. Honeysuckle draped from unseen trellises. Wisteria hung like curtains. The light filtering through the leaves was green and gold, dappled, dreamlike. I should have felt peace. Instead, I felt watched. Not by eyes, exactly. More like the garden itself was aware of me, the way a room feels different when someone enters it. The flowers seemed to turn their faces as I passed. The leaves whispered without wind. I told myself it was beautiful. I told myself I was lucky to have found this place. The path split ahead, left or right. Both looked identical, the same worn stones, the same overhanging branches, the same quality of light. I chose left because I'm left-handed, and it seemed as good a reason as any. 10 minutes later, the path split again, and again, and again. I began to notice something odd. Each junction looked familiar, but not quite the same. The roses might be pink instead of red. The lavender might lean left instead of right. Small differences, easily dismissed, but accumulating. I started marking my choices in my mind. Left, right, right, left. A pattern I could reverse. But when I tried to go back, following my mental map in reverse, the paths didn't match. A right turn that should have led to a fork instead opened onto a circular garden with a fountain at its center. Water fell from a stone angel's cupped hands, and the angel's face was smooth. No features at all, just the suggestion of a face, like a memory already fading. I sat on the fountain's edge. My phone showed no signal. The time read 4:47 p.m. I'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes. I would rest for a moment, then find my way out. Gardens have edges. All spaces have boundaries. The water in the fountain was perfectly clear. I could see every stone at the bottom, green with moss, scattered with copper pennies. Someone had made wishes here. I wondered if any had come true. When I looked up, the angel's face had changed. Still smooth, still featureless, but now it seemed to be looking at me. No eyes, but looking nonetheless. I stood quickly, water droplets falling from my fingers, and chose a path at random. This one led through a tunnel of hedges. The walls on either side were dense, impenetrable green. Box hedge, maybe, or yew. The kind that takes decades to grow this tall. The path was straight, which felt like progress, until it curved, and I was back in another junction, another choice, another moment of recognition that wasn't quite recognition. Had I been here before? The roses were yellow now, or had they always been yellow? Memory felt slippery, unreliable. I'd read somewhere that the brain fills in details, creates continuity where there might be none. Maybe I'd never seen red roses. Maybe I'd imagined them. The light was changing. That golden, green quality deepening into something richer, amber dark. Late afternoon sliding toward evening. I checked my phone 45:1 p.m. 4 minutes. Impossible. But the light didn't lie. Shadows stretched long across the pathways. The flowers seemed to close slightly, petals drawing inward. And now I could hear something. A sound that might have been there all along, but I was only now noticing. A humming, low and constant, not mechanical, organic, like many voices humming just below the threshold of melody. I walked faster. Right, left, straight ahead. The paths multiplied. Some were wide enough for 3 people to walk abreast. Others narrowed until branches caught at my clothes. I pushed through a curtain of willow fronds and found myself in a garden room where sundials stood in a circle, each one showing a different time. None showed 4:51 p.m. One read midnight. Another dawn. Another showed 3 o'clock, but I couldn't tell if it meant morning or afternoon. The shadows cast by the sundials didn't point in the same direction. Each had its own sun, its own source of light that I couldn't see. "This isn't real," I said aloud. My voice sounded flat, absorbed by the green walls around me. This is a dream, or I hit my head, or something. But I felt awake, hyper-aware even. I could feel the texture of my clothes against my skin, smell the jasmine and that under-smell of old paper. Taste copper at the back of my throat the way you do before a storm. I chose the widest path leading out of the sundial garden. This one was lined with statues, stone figures of people in garden poses. A woman bending to smell a flower. A man reaching for fruit from a tree. A child looking back over their shoulder. Each statue was beautiful and slightly wrong. The proportions not quite human. The expressions too intense or too absent. As I passed the child's statue, I had the distinct impression it had moved. Not when I was looking at it, but between one glance and the next, its head had turned. Just slightly. Just enough. I didn't run. Running would mean panic, and I wasn't panicking. I was walking briskly, purposefully. Following the path because paths lead somewhere. They have to. That's what paths are for. The sky above was darkening to indigo. Stars were appearing, but they weren't quite right either. Too many, too bright. Constellations I didn't recognize. The moon rose between branches, full and heavy and the color of old bone. My phone now read 4:47 p.m., earlier than before. I held it in my hand and watched the numbers. They didn't change. 40:47, 47, 4:47. I turned it off, then on again. 4:47. The humming was louder now, or I was more aware of it. It seemed to come from the flowers themselves, and from deep in their throats where the pollen dusted the stamens. I knelt beside a bed of poppies, when had poppies appeared, and listened. Yes, the sound was coming from inside them, and underneath the humming, something else. Words, maybe, or the shape of words. the ghost of meaning. I stood, brushed dirt from my knees, kept walking. The paths kept splitting, branching, offering choices that were no choices at all, because every direction led deeper in. I tried marking my way with torn leaves, but when I circled back, and I did circle back, repeatedly, the markers were gone, not disturbed, just gone as if they'd never been. In one junction, I found a bench. It looked inviting, painted white, with vines growing up its legs. I sat, just for a moment, just to think. The garden was quiet now except for the humming, no bird sounds, no insects, just that constant, low hum and the whisper of leaves, and the sound of my own breathing, too loud in my ears. I noticed something carved into the bench's backrest. Words, worn smooth by weather and time, but still legible. All who enter here are already home. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. I rose and walked on, past fountains and statues, through tunnels of green and archways of flowers. The moon tracked overhead, keeping pace with me, always visible through gaps in the foliage. My feet ached. My throat was dry, but I wasn't hungry, which seemed odd. How long had I been walking? 4:47 p.m. My phone insisted. I came to a gate. Finally, a gate meant an exit, a boundary, and outside. This gate was wooden, arched, painted blue, set in a wall covered with climbing roses. White roses this time, luminous in the moonlight. I reached for the handle. The gate opened easily, swinging inward without a sound. Beyond it was another path, of course. Another path lined with lavender and honeysuckle, curving away into shadow and light. The same path, the same garden, or was it? The lavender leaned slightly differently. The stones underfoot were darker, small differences, but there. I stepped through the gate because what else was there to do? Behind me, it closed with a soft click. I walked on, more junctions, more choices, left and right and straight ahead. My legs moved automatically now, carrying me forward because stopping seemed worse than continuing. The garden was everything now. I couldn't remember clearly what lay outside it. The city, my apartment. They felt like stories I'd heard once, details already fading. I found another garden room, this one with a pool of still water reflecting the two, many stars. I knelt at its edge and looked at my reflection. My face looked back at me, familiar but strange. Had my eyes always been that wide? Had my hair always fallen that way? Behind my reflection, other faces appeared in the water. Indistinct, blurred. The shapes of people who might have been standing behind me. I turned quickly. No one there. Just flowers and hedges and the eternal paths. But when I looked back at the water, the faces remained. And now I could see they were speaking, their mouths moving in silence, trying to tell me something. Warn me. Welcome me. I leaned closer, trying to read their lips, trying to understand. My hand touched the water's surface. It wasn't cold or warm. It wasn't wet. It had no temperature, no substance. My fingers passed through it like it was air, like it was nothing. I pulled back, stood, walked away quickly. Too quickly. I wasn't running. I was walking fast. The paths blurred together. Green and stone and flowers and shadow. How many hours had passed? How many days? My phone still read 4:47 p.m. in the dying afternoon light that never quite became night. The moon hung overhead, full and watchful. The stars multiplied. I began to see things moving in my peripheral vision. Not when I looked directly at them. They were too clever for that. But at the edges of sight, shapes shifted. The statues walked when I wasn't watching. The flowers reached. The paths rearranged themselves, folding and unfolding like origami. In another junction, or perhaps the same one, I could no longer tell. I found a mirror standing alone on the grass. No frame, no support, just a tall mirror reflecting the garden behind me. I should have walked past it. I didn't. The reflection showed the garden, but not quite as it was. The flowers were wilted, the paths were overgrown, and in the distance, at the edges of the reflection, I could see figures. People perhaps, or things shaped like people, standing still, watching the center of the mirror. Watching me. I stepped aside. The figures in the mirror didn't move. They stayed where they were, still watching where I'd been standing, as if I were still there. As if the me in the mirror and the me outside it had come unstuck from each other. I left the mirror and walked on. What else was there to do? The garden stretched infinite in all directions. I understood that now. Not large, infinite. Every path led to more paths. Every gate opened onto another garden. The walls had no outside because there was no outside. There was only here, this green maze, this beautiful trap. The humming had words now. I could almost hear them. Almost. They whispered just below comprehension, a language I'd never learned but somehow knew. The flowers sang it. The paths spoke it. My own heartbeat seemed to sync with its rhythm. I found a fountain where I'd found a bench before. Or a bench where there'd been a fountain. Or neither. Or both. The garden was shifting. Had always been shifting, would always shift. Fixed and fluid. Permanent and impermanent. A labyrinth with no center and no edge. I sat again. My feet didn't hurt anymore. I wasn't thirsty. Wasn't hungry. Wasn't tired, though I must have been walking for hours. Days. Weeks. Time had become as meaningless as direction. The moon was beautiful. The stars were beautiful. The flowers glowed with their own light now, soft bioluminescence in shades of blue and green and violet. When had that started? Had they always glowed? Memory was unreliable. Other people walked the paths now. I caught glimpses of them at junctions, disappearing around corners. Some wore modern clothes like mine. Others wore things from different eras. Long dresses, suits, robes. All walking purposefully, as if they knew where they were going. As if there were somewhere to go. I called out once. "Hello, excuse me." They didn't respond, didn't turn. Just kept walking, fading into the green shadows. Maybe I was the shadow. Maybe I was the one fading. I stood and walked on because that's what you do in a garden. You walk. You explore. You look for something. The exit, the center, the secret. The garden holds all paths and no path. It offers infinite choices that are all the same choice. Stay. Keep walking. Be here. In this eternal green twilight where time pools like water and paths fold back on themselves and the flowers sing their wordless songs. I walk on, and on, and on. The gate was there when I found it, or I was there when it found me. Blue wood, white roses, the same gate or a different gate or all gates at once. I reach for the handle because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. That's what I'll always do. It opens. Beyond it, a path, of course. A path lined with lavender and honeysuckle, curving away into shadow and light. I step through. Behind me, the gate closes softly. And I walk on, in the garden that has no end and no beginning, where afternoon lasts forever and the moon keeps watch, and somewhere, always, a phone reads 4:47 p.m. The paths split ahead, left or right. Both look the same. I choose left because I'm left-handed, and it seems as good a reason as any. The garden welcomes me home, story 5. The Orpheum Theater had been closed for 37 years when I found the tickets in my grandfather's belongings. 2 stubs, faded red, dated for a showing that never happened. October 15th, 1987. The day before the fire that should have destroyed the place. Should have, but didn't quite. The building still stood on Maple Street, boarded up, forgotten, waiting. I don't know why I went. Curiosity, maybe. Grief, certainly. Grandfather had died 3 weeks earlier, and I'd been sorting through his things in a numb haze, looking for anything that felt like connection. The tickets felt like a message. a thread leading somewhere. The October evening was cool and gray when I stood before the Orpheum. The marquee still hung above the entrance, letters long since stolen or fallen, leaving only the skeleton of what once spelled out movie titles. The Art Deco facade was intact but weathered, beautiful in its decay. Plywood covered the ticket booth. Chains wrapped the front doors, but the side alley was accessible. A fire door hung slightly ajar, rusted hinges groaning. I told myself I was just looking, just checking if anything remained inside. The tickets were in my pocket, smooth and fragile against my fingers. The door opened wider than it should have. Not with force, but willingly, as if it had been waiting for someone to push. The darkness beyond was absolute. I used my phone's flashlight, the beam cutting through decades of dust motes that swirled like galaxies. The hallway inside was narrow, walls covered in peeling wallpaper that might once have been gold. Water damage had turned it brown and black, creating patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like faces. I moved quickly past them, following the corridor as it curved gently left. It opened into the lobby. My breath caught. The Orpheum's lobby was magnificent, even in ruins. A grand staircase swept upward to the balcony level, its red carpet faded to rust. The chandelier still hung from the ceiling, somehow impossibly intact. Crystal teardrops caught my phone's light and scattered it across walls decorated with Art Deco murals of silver screen goddesses. Their painted eyes seemed to track my movement. The concession stand stood dark and empty, glass cases shattered, but the smell lingered. Popcorn and artificial butter, stale candy. That particular scent of old theaters, that's part velvet and part must and part collective dream. Impossible that the smell remained after all these years. But it did. I stood in the center of the lobby, slowly turning, taking it in. And then I noticed one of the main auditorium doors was open. Just slightly. Just enough to suggest entrance. I should have left then. The Orpheum was private property, condemned, dangerous. The floor could give way. The ceiling could collapse. 100 rational reasons to go. Instead, I walked toward the open door. The auditorium beyond was vast. Rows of seats descended toward a stage and screen, hundreds of them, perhaps 1,000. Most were intact. The screen itself was gray, silver in my phone's light, torn in places but still hanging, still vast, still waiting for images to fill it. I don't remember deciding to sit down, but I found myself in the middle section, row M, seat 13. The chair creaked but held. The velvet under my hands was worn smooth by countless other hands, countless other people who'd sat here in the dark, watching light and shadow tell stories. My phone's battery was at 60%. Plenty of charge. I set it in the cup holder, light pointing upward, casting strange shadows on the ceiling. The plasterwork up there was ornate. Cherubs and clouds and Art Deco sunbursts, all rendered in shades of gray. In the silence, I could hear the building settling, wood expanding and contracting, pipes ticking, the soft whisper of my own breathing. And underneath it all, something else, a humming, mechanical maybe, or maybe not. The kind of sound old buildings make that could be wind or water or electricity still flowing in walls where it shouldn't flow. I took out the tickets. 2 stubs for a 7:30 p.m. showing. No title listed, just special matinee. I checked my phone 7:18 p.m., 12 minutes until showtime. The thought made me smile grimly. Showtime for an empty theater. But then the lights came on. Not all of them. Just the running lights along the aisles, soft red glows that marked the path up and down. And the exit signs, suddenly illuminated, casting their green light across the nearest rows. My heart slammed against my ribs. Emergency power, I told myself. Some backup generator finally kicking in after decades. Perfectly explainable. except I hadn't heard a generator start. The lights had simply appeared, as if they'd always been on and I was only now noticing. I grabbed my phone, started toward the aisle. Time to leave. Time to go. This was wrong. This was. The screen lit up. Pure white light, bright enough to make me shield my eyes. The projection booth, somewhere far behind me, high in the back wall, must have activated. More impossible backup systems, more malfunction, more reasons to leave immediately. But I didn't leave. I sat back down slowly as the white screen began to flicker. Numbers appeared. A countdown. 9, 8, I whispered, but I was watching. Couldn't look away. 7, 6, 5. The screen went black. Then, slowly, an image faded in. Black and white footage, grainy. The kind of quality from old films. It showed the Orpheum itself. The exterior, the marquee bright and whole, letters clearly visible. The matinee, to find that it only leads to another auditorium, another screen, another showing. The Orpheum is still there on Maple Street. I drive past it sometimes, though I try not to. The building stands unchanged, waiting. Sometimes I think I see light behind the boarded windows, flickering, projection light. And sometimes, when the street is quiet and empty, I can hear it. The faint sound of a projector running, the soft whir of film feeding through old mechanisms, the phantom sound of an audience that was never there, or perhaps was always there, invisible, eternal, watching stories that play only for them. I keep my grandfather's ticket stubs, even though I threw them away. They reappeared in my jacket pocket 3 days later, both of them smooth and faded red, dated for a showing that never happened. Or perhaps did happen. Perhaps is still happening. Perhaps will always be happening in that dark auditorium where time doesn't move forward, only loops back on itself, reel after reel after reel. Sometimes I take them out and look at them, turn them over in my hands, feel their weight impossibly light, and I think about going back, about walking through that fire door one more time, about sitting in seat 13 and watching whatever comes next. Because the thing is, I never saw how the film ended. I left before the final reel, and that feels wrong somehow, incomplete. Like walking out of a theater before the credits roll, before you know how the story resolves. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the film doesn't end. Maybe that's why they're there, the faceless ones trapped in the projection. They stayed until the end, and the end never came. Or maybe I'm already part of it. Maybe I stepped into the beam without realizing it, and everything since, coming home, throwing away the tickets, living my life, maybe that's just another scene, another sequence. And somewhere, in an empty auditorium, a projector is casting my shadow on a silver screen, and faceless figures are watching me move through my scripted life, waiting to see what I'll do next, waiting to see if I'll come back. The Orpheum is open every night at 9:30 p.m., though no one living knows it. The doors are chained, but the fire door is always unlocked. The seats wait empty, but they're never alone. The screen glows in the dark, projecting films that no one recorded, showing stories that haven't been written yet. And sometimes, if you walk down Maple Street on an October evening, when the air is cool and gray, if you're quiet and you listen carefully, you can hear it. The invitation. The whisper of old film running through aging projectors. The promise of one more showing, one more matinee. Tonight only. Always tonight. Forever tonight. The tickets are in my pocket. I can feel them there, warm against my chest. 2 stubs for a showing that might happen or might have happened or might be happening right now. Row M, seat 13. The best seat in the house. All I have to do is go back. All I have to do is walk through that door. All I have to do is sit in the dark and watch. The film is waiting. It's always waiting. And maybe this time, I'll stay until the end, night only. The camera moved inside, through the lobby I'd just walked through, but whole and populated. People in 1980s clothes, buying tickets, getting popcorn, laughing soundlessly. The film had no audio, just the flicker of images and the soft whir of the projector. I recognized the concession stand clerk. Not his face. It was too blurry for that, but his posture, the way he moved. My grandfather had worked here. He'd told me stories about it. About the moviegoers and the sticky floors and the broken popcorn machine that would spray butter everywhere. Was this his memory? His film? The camera followed someone, a young man in a denim jacket, into the auditorium. My auditorium. He walked down the aisle to row M, to seat 13. He sat exactly where I was sitting now. The camera angle changed, showing the view from his perspective. Looking up at the screen within the screen. And on that nested screen, another film was beginning. But this one wasn't black and white. This one was in color, vivid and clear. It showed a house, a living room I knew, my living room, my apartment. Current day, current time. I could see the mess I'd left. Grandfather's boxes stacked by the sofa, coffee cup on the table, my jacket thrown over a chair. The camera moved through the rooms of my apartment, slowly, deliberately, looking for something or someone. It entered the bedroom. The bed was unmade. My work clothes hung on the closet door. And then the camera turned and looked at something off screen. The angle suggested it was looking at whoever was filming. At a mirror, maybe. At their reflection. The screen went black. I sat rigid in seat 13, heart hammering. The whir of the projector continued. After a moment, a new image appeared. The auditorium. This auditorium, empty seats rendered in crisp, full color. The camera panned slowly across them, row by row. Coming closer, closer. Row N, row M, it stopped on seat 13. I was on screen, sitting exactly as I was sitting, phone in the cup holder, hands gripping the armrests. On screen, I was staring up at the screen where I watched myself watching myself. Infinite regression. Mirrors facing mirrors. On screen, I stood up, started backing away toward the aisle, but I hadn't moved. I was still sitting frozen, watching my image do what I hadn't done yet. What I should do. What I would do. The me on screen reached the aisle, turned, started running. The camera didn't follow. It stayed focused on seat 13, on the empty seat, on the space where I had been. And then, from the bottom of the frame, something rose up. Slowly. Deliberately. A figure seated in row L, directly in front of where I'd been sitting. It stood and turned. It had no face, not blurred, not shadowed, just smooth. Blank. The absence of a face. It wore clothes I couldn't quite focus on, colors that hurt to look at. It turned fully toward the camera, toward seat 13, toward me. And it began to walk. Not toward the aisle, toward the screen. Toward the camera, toward me. I stood. Actually stood this time, not just on screen. The me on screen was gone, vanished into the exit. But the faceless figure on screen kept coming. It walked up row M, seat by seat, getting larger as it approached the camera's position. Getting closer. I started backing up the aisle, eyes locked on the screen. The figure was at seat 10 now, seat 11, seat 12. In another second, it would reach seat 13, would reach the camera's perspective, would reach. It stopped, went perfectly still. And even though it had no face, I knew it was looking at me, not at the camera. At me in the theater, backing away. Then it turned its blank face toward the edge of the screen, toward the screen's border, toward the boundary between image and reality, and it stepped sideways out of frame. The screen showed only empty seats now. Row M stretched out unchanged. Seat 13 sat empty, but the figure was gone, not just off camera, gone from the film entirely. The projector continued whirring. I heard footsteps behind me. Not loud, not rushing. Just steady, deliberate steps on carpet. Coming down the aisle I'd just backed up. Coming from the direction of the exit I'd been heading toward. I spun around. The aisle was empty. The exit sign glowed green. No one there. But the footsteps continued. I could hear them, clear and present, the soft compression of feet on old velvet. And now I could hear breathing. Not mine. Someone else's. Low and steady and close. I ran. Not toward the exits. The footsteps were coming from there. I ran down toward the screen, toward the stage. The slope made me stumble. My phone flew from my hand, clattered under seats, its light spinning wildly before going dark. The auditorium wasn't completely black. The screen still glowed, and the running lights still marked the aisles with red. In that dim illumination, I reached the front of the theater. There had to be a door to backstage. Theaters always had them. I felt along the wall beside the screen, hands scrabbling over wood paneling and metal fixtures. A door. I found it. It opened. The space behind the screen was narrow, dusty, filled with old props and forgotten equipment. I could see the back of the screen itself, the white fabric glowing from the projection light on the other side, and I could see shadows moving on it. Shadows cast by the film. Shadows cast by something in the auditorium. More than one figure now. They moved down the aisles, row by row, methodical and patient. I counted at least 5, maybe more. All of them faceless. All of them searching for me. I moved deeper into the backstage area, away from the glowing screen. Found stairs going up. They had to lead somewhere. Projection booth, maybe. Another exit. Anywhere but here. The stairs were metal, open-backed, bolted to the wall. They shook with each step, decades of rust making them treacherous. I climbed anyway, hand over hand on the railing, trying to be silent, trying not to think about the drop below, or the figures below, or what I'd seen. The stairs ended at a small platform and a door. Locked. No, not locked, jammed. I threw my shoulder against it once, twice, and it gave way, sending me stumbling into the projection booth. The projector was running. An old film projector, reels turning, light beaming through the small window that looked down on the auditorium. But no one was operating it. No one was here. The film ran itself, feeding through the mechanism with soft clicking precision. I looked through the window. From here, I could see the entire auditorium spread below. Every seat, every aisle. The screen far below, showing the projection booth. I was on screen. Standing exactly where I was standing, looking down at the auditorium. And in the image on screen, I could see what I could see: the auditorium, the seats, the screen within the screen, showing another projection booth, smaller, receding. And I could see them, the figures. They'd stopped moving. All of them stood perfectly still, scattered throughout the seating area, all facing upward, facing the projection booth, facing me. Even though they had no faces, I knew they were watching. I turned away from the window. The projection booth was small, cramped, filled with equipment. There had to be another exit, a door to the outside, a fire escape, something. But there was only one door, the one I'd come through. And as I stared at it, I heard sounds from the stairwell. Footsteps on metal, steady, climbing. Multiple sets of feet. They'd found the stairs. I looked around desperately. A window. There, small but large enough. It looked out onto Maple Street. I could see streetlights, cars passing. The real world just beyond the glass. Safety, escape. The window wouldn't open. Painted shut or locked or both. I grabbed a metal film canister and swung it at the glass. The impact made barely a sound. The glass didn't crack. I swung again, harder. Nothing again. Again. The footsteps were getting closer, almost at the top of the stairs. I turned to face the door. backed against the window. The projector's beam cut across the dark booth, a shaft of light filled with dancing dust. The reels turned. The film played. The door opened. One of them stood there, featureless, present. It took a step into the booth, and then another figure appeared behind it, and another. They filed in silently, filling the small space surrounding the projector. Surrounding me, I pressed against the window, feeling the cool glass against my back. They came closer. I could see the texture of their clothes now. Normal fabrics, normal patterns, but somehow wrong. The colors shifted. The patterns hurt to focus on. The nearest one reached out, its hand, perfectly normal, 5 fingers, human proportions, extended toward my face, not aggressive, almost gentle, like it wanted to touch me, to confirm I was real. I closed my eyes, felt the touch, cool, smooth, barely there, felt it trace my features, forehead, eyes, nose, chin, learning the shape of me, understanding the contours of a face. And then it pulled back. The touch withdrew. I opened my eyes. They were all standing in front of the projection window now, looking down at the auditorium, looking at the screen. And slowly, one by one, they stepped toward the light, into the projector's beam. Their shadows appeared on the screen below. Huge shadows cast by the projection light, playing across the silver surface. And then their forms began to flatten, to compress, to become part of the light itself. They were merging with the beam, with the film, with the image being cast below. One by one, they disappeared into the projection, into the movie, onto the screen. The last one turned back to me before it went, stood in profile, half in the light and half in shadow. It had no face, but I had the sense it was offering something, a choice, an invitation. Then it stepped fully into the beam and was gone. I stood alone in the projection booth. The projector ran on, the film continuing, the image below showing an empty auditorium. Empty seats, empty screen. Nothing haunted, nothing wrong, just a theater playing to no one. I left the booth, walked down the metal stairs on legs that shook, crossed behind the screen, emerged into the auditorium. The running lights were off now. The exit signs were dark. Only the screen glowed, and as I walked up the aisle toward the exit, I looked back at it once. The film had changed. Now it showed me walking up the aisle, showed my back, my silhouette against the dim light, showed me reaching the exit door, pushing it open. I turned back forward and walked, reached the door, pushed it open. The lobby was dark and empty. The chandelier hung still. The mural goddesses watched with painted eyes. I crossed to the side corridor, found the fire door, pushed out into the alley. The October night was cool and gray. Maple Street stretched normal and real before me. Cars passed. A couple walked by, talking, laughing. The ordinary world, unchanged. I looked back at the Orpheum. The marquee hung dark above. Plywood covered the windows. Chains wrapped the doors. Silent, abandoned, waiting. My phone was still inside, fallen under a seat in row M. I didn't go back for it. At home, I found my laptop and searched for information about the Orpheum, about the fire that was supposed to have destroyed it in 1987. But I couldn't find any record of a fire. The theater had simply closed. One day it was operating, the next it was empty. Locked, forgotten, no fire, no tragedy. Just closure. I searched for Orpheum matinee October 15, 1987, and found nothing. Searched for missing persons, strange events, anything connected to that date and that place. Nothing came up. As if that showing never happened. As if those tickets in my grandfather's effects were for an event that never was. I threw the tickets away, put grandfather's boxes in storage, tried to forget. But sometimes late at night, when I close my eyes, I can still see them. The faceless figures standing in the dark. And I wonder where they went when they stepped into the light. What film are they part of now? What screen projects their shadows? And I wonder about the choice that last one offered. What would have happened if I'd stepped into the beam? If I'd joined them in the flickering light, become part of the endless matinee? Would I be more real there than I am here? Would I finally understand what story they were trying to tell? I don't go to movies anymore. Can't bring myself to sit in the dark, watching light and shadow dance, because sometimes in the corner of my eye I see them, sitting in nearby seats, standing in the aisles, watching the screen with their absent faces, watching me, waiting for me to understand that the film never ends. It just loops and loops, and we're all projected, all shadows on a screen, all playing our parts for an empty theater, all waiting for someone to walk through the exit door to Story 6. The rain had been falling all evening, that particular kind of rain that seems to exist only between midnight and dawn. I'd been waiting outside the train station for 43 minutes, I counted, when the taxi pulled up. It was unremarkable. One of those anonymous white vehicles that populate every city at every hour, worn and comfortable in a way that suggests it had carried countless passengers before me. The driver didn't turn to greet me. His hands remained at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, even as I opened the door and settled into the back seat. There was a smell, something like old leather mixed with a cologne that had long since turned chemical and synthetic. The interior was cool, almost deliberately so, despite the warmth of the October night outside. Address. His voice emerged flat, without inflection. I noticed his eyes in the rearview mirror. They were unusual, not in shape or color, but in their quality of stillness. Most people's eyes move with their thoughts, with the small involuntary movements that make us alive. His didn't. I gave him my address. He nodded once, a mechanical gesture, and the car pulled forward. The road home normally takes 20 minutes. I knew this route well. I traveled it 3 times a week. First Meridian Street, which curves past the sleeping hospital. Then through downtown, where the restaurants and bars still glowed with pale light. Then the residential neighborhoods, quieter and quieter, until finally my street emerged from the darkness like something remembered rather than visited. But somewhere after we passed the hospital, I realized we weren't going the right way. "This isn't the route," I said quietly. The rain intensified against the windows, creating a pattern that was almost rhythmic. His response was a simple sound, not quite a word. Perhaps an acknowledgement or perhaps a negation. Hard to tell. I leaned forward. I said, "This isn't the right way. I know the route well." The driver's eyes met mine in the mirror. When they did, something behind them seemed to shift, like a door opening briefly onto a room I couldn't quite see into. "I know where we're going," he said. His voice was the same flat tone, but now there was something else underneath it. Something like a great weight pressing down from very far away. The streets outside had become unfamiliar. Not strange in the way strange places are strange. Not architecturally unusual or exotic. They were unfamiliar in a deeper way. The buildings all seemed to exist at a slight angle to reality, as if I was viewing them through very clear glass. There were street lights, but their illumination seemed to come from inside the buildings rather than from above. The storefronts displayed mannequins in postures that felt almost angry. Their plastic faces turned toward the windows of the taxi as we passed. "Where are we?" I asked. "You asked me to take you home," the driver said. His hands hadn't moved on the steering wheel. "I'm taking you home." The thing I noticed increasingly was the lack of sound. The rain was silent. The tires on the pavement made no sound. Even the engine, now that I really listened, was producing no sound at all. The motion of the car continued forward. I could feel it, could see the scenery moving past, but we were traveling in complete silence, as if the taxi existed in a pocket outside of normal reality. The silence grew heavier with each passing moment, pressing down against my ears. I tried to open the door. The child lock was engaged. I hadn't seen him engage it. There had been no movement I could perceive, but it was engaged nonetheless. My heart rate, which had been gradual in its quickening, suddenly accelerated. "Let me out of this car," I said. I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "We're almost there now," the driver said. His expression in the mirror hadn't changed at all. Perhaps it had never changed. Perhaps his face was simply set that way, one arrangement of features repeated infinitely, like a photograph. The streets seemed to loop. I saw the same buildings twice, 3 times, but each repetition was slightly different. A window that had been dark was now glowing faintly. A door that had been closed was now open just a crack. The landscape was updating itself as we moved through it, like someone slowly redrawing a painting while you watched. My apartment building appeared ahead. I recognized it immediately. The distinctive corner with the crooked street light, the worn brick face, the concrete steps leading up. It looked exactly as it always looked, which somehow made it more terrible than if it had been transformed into something unrecognizable. The taxi came to a stop. The silence pressed deeper into my ears, creating a sensation almost like pressure. The driver's hands remained on the wheel. His eyes in the mirror looked at me, or perhaps through me. I couldn't tell anymore. "We're home," he said. I yanked at the door handle. This time it released. The night air that rushed in was cold, far colder than it should have been. I stumbled out onto the pavement. The rain continued to fall, silently still. Behind me, the taxi waited. The driver didn't turn around. He didn't seem to breathe. He simply waited, his hands holding the steering wheel in that eternal 10 and 2 position. I ran up the steps to my building, fumbled for my keys, managed to get inside. Only when I reached the landing of the second floor did I turn to look back through the window. The taxi was still there, idling silently in front of the building. I watched it for perhaps 5 minutes. The driver never moved. His head remained straight ahead, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. Then, gradually, the taxi began to fade. Not moving away, fading. It became translucent first, then transparent, then it was simply gone. The street returned to its normal quiet, the rain to its normal silence, the night to its normal darkness. Everything was as it should be. I've been home since then. It's been several weeks now. I take the train more often. When I do have to take a taxi, I call the company in advance, watch the dispatcher carefully, get the license plate number, and sit directly behind the front passenger seat rather than behind the driver. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint sound of an engine idling outside. It's quiet enough that I can't quite confirm it's real. It disappears when I go to check. My apartment is on the second floor, so the street below is mostly hidden. I'm fairly certain that if I ever need to get home late at night, if I find myself standing outside the station with rain falling silently down, if I see that particular white taxi pull up in front of me, I'm fairly certain I know exactly who will be driving. And I'm not certain anymore whether I'll have a choice about getting in. Story 7. I noticed the change first in the bathroom mirror, which is the only place where I ever really look at myself carefully anymore. The human face is a strange thing to examine closely. Too familiar and yet infinitely strange, a landscape you never truly know. It was a Tuesday morning, unremarkable in every way. I was brushing my teeth, my mind already moving through the day ahead, when something about my reflection caught my attention. For just a moment, less than a moment, really, the span of a single blink, the face looking back at me was not quite my face. The features were rearranged. My mouth was wider, turned upward in an expression I don't make. My eyes were positioned differently, or perhaps they were simply looking at me in a way that my own eyes don't typically look at the world. The mouth opened, and for an instant I saw teeth too numerous, too white, too perfect. Then I blinked, and I was looking at myself again. Perfectly normal. Exactly as I always looked. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the tiredness from not sleeping well. I told myself I'd been looking at my reflection too long, and the familiar had simply become strange for a moment, the way a word becomes gibberish if you repeat it too many times. This happens to everyone, I thought. Hypnagogic imagery, mirror-gazing phenomena, the mind playing small tricks. That night, I caught my reflection in the window as I closed the kitchen blinds. There it was again, just for a fraction of a second, but long enough to be certain. My face, but wrong. The skin tone wasn't quite right, slightly gray or perhaps slightly green. I couldn't focus on it long enough to know. The cheekbones were higher, more prominent. The eyes were looking straight through the glass at me, and the expression in them was one of hunger or longing, or some emotion I don't have a name for. I stopped looking at mirrors for 3 days. This was harder than it should have been. I found myself drawn to them. The mirror in the car windshield at red lights, the reflection in storefront windows, even the dark screen of my laptop when it was powered down. It seemed that every reflective surface had become a potential window into that other face. And in each one, I saw it, my face, but corrupted somehow, rearranged by an intelligence that understood the human form, but didn't quite understand how to put it back together correctly. On the 4th day, I thought I could approach this rationally. I set up my phone on a tripod, aimed it at my bathroom mirror, and recorded a full minute of myself looking at my reflection. I played the video back. For the first 58 seconds, I was perfectly normal, just a person looking at themselves the way people do. Then, in the final 2 seconds before I moved away, the reflection flickered. Even in the recorded video, clearly captured, the face became something else. It was almost imperceptible, a distortion, a wrongness that registered in my brain before I could consciously identify what I was seeing. I watched those final 2 seconds, maybe 20 times. Each viewing, I became more convinced that I wasn't seeing an artifact of the camera or a trick of pixels and light. I was seeing something real. My dentist appointment was scheduled for the following week, and I almost canceled it. But I thought, I convinced myself that seeing another person look at me might somehow clarify things. Humans are still human when other people look at them, after all. The presence of a witness seemed important. Dr. Morrison was the same as always. Distracted, kind in a distant way, focused on the technical rather than the personal. I sat in the chair, tilted my head back, opened my mouth. He shone the light into my mouth, made his little noises of professional consideration, and I watched him in the mirror on the ceiling of the dental chair. For a moment, I couldn't see his reflection. Not that he was invisible. The room was there, his equipment, the chair, but where his reflection should have been, there was just a gap, an absence. Then it snapped back into place, and he was reflecting normally, leaning over me with the mirror and pick in his hands. But in that moment of absence, I'd seen something else in the gap. My own face, but from behind. as if there was someone else looking over my shoulder. And that face, the one looking at me from behind me, the one I couldn't see unless his reflection temporarily ceased to exist, that one was smiling in a way that my face doesn't smile. I made an excuse about having a fever and left the appointment early. That night, I took every mirror out of my apartment. The bathroom mirror, the large one in the bedroom, the decorative ones in the living room. I put them all in the storage closet, facing inward so they wouldn't reflect anything. This felt like progress, like taking control of the situation. For 2 days, it worked. Without mirrors, without reflective surfaces, I could almost believe that nothing was wrong. That my reflection was simply elsewhere, unable to reach me without a portal to cross through. But you can't live in the world without reflections. A window in sunlight became a mirror. A puddle on the street after rain. I was walking past a storefront when I saw it again. My reflection in the glass. But this time it wasn't looking at me. It was looking past me, at something behind me. Its mouth was open as if it was speaking or laughing, and I could see the wrongness in the jaw, the way it hung slightly too loose, the teeth that seemed to arrange themselves in a pattern my teeth don't arrange themselves in. My reflection looked frightened, or perhaps thrilled. It was hard to tell. I turned around to see what it was looking at. There was nothing behind me, just the ordinary street, the ordinary people, the ordinary day. When I turned back to the window, my reflection was still looking past me. And now there was something else, another reflection, overlaid on top of mine, but not quite the same angle, not quite the same perspective. It was as if a second person was standing exactly where I was standing, occupying the same space, also looking into the window. But when I looked down at where that second person should be, there was nothing there. No shadow on the pavement. No displacement of air. Just me, standing alone, casting one reflection, but watching two distinct shapes move in the glass. The reflection of me opened its mouth wider, and I heard the sound. A thin, distant sound, like someone calling my name from very far away. It was my voice, I think. It was my inflection, my cadence, but slightly wrong, slightly off. Like a translation of my voice through some barrier that had corrupted it slightly. The other reflection, the one I couldn't identify, turned to look at it. And they seemed to exchange some kind of silent understanding. I've learned to avoid mirrors now. I haven't seen my own reflection properly in 17 days. But I'm becoming aware of something more troubling. When I talk to people, they sometimes seem confused. Your reflection. They ask, "What do you mean you don't have a reflection?" They tell me I'm looking pale, that I seem distracted. One friend asked if I'd been getting enough sleep. Another suggested I might have anxiety and offered to recommend a therapist. But I can see them reacting to something. They can see something about me that has changed. Last Tuesday, my coworker stared at me for a very long time and said, quietly, "There's something different about your face." "Did you get your hair cut?" I said no, I didn't, and she nodded slowly and looked away. I think I know what it is. I think my reflection, or reflections, plural, because I'm increasingly convinced there's more than one, have been changing, have been becoming something else. And I think perhaps, bit by bit, I'm beginning to look like them. Or they're beginning to look more like me. The boundary between us, which should be clear and fixed, is becoming blurred. Tonight, I'm going to force myself to look in a mirror. I've kept this postponement as long as I can. I'm sitting in my bathroom right now, the light on, staring at the closed medicine cabinet where a mirror hangs. My hand is on the handle. I'm gathering the courage to open it. I'm almost afraid of what I'll see. Not because I'm afraid of the wrongness, the distortion, the other faces that have been hiding in my reflection. I'm afraid of what I might see looking back, and whether I'll still recognize it as wrong at all. Story A. I took the night position at the university library because it seemed simple, quiet. The kind of job where I could keep my head down and maintain the distance from people that I'd worked so hard to cultivate. 8 hours, midnight to 8 in the morning, monitoring the archive section, reshelving materials, and maintaining the record systems. The pay was adequate. The hours were predictable. The work was solitary in exactly the way I wanted. The first month was precisely as advertised. I'd arrive at midnight, clock in, and settle into my routine. The library at night was a different world from its daytime self, vast and echoing and somehow more real, as though the books and documents were finally allowed to breathe without the interference of hundreds of people wandering through the stacks. I worked efficiently and quietly, and I had minimal interaction with the day staff who'd brief me on any issues before they left. It was perfect. The oddities started gradually. Small things. A book misplaced on a shelf, but not randomly, placed deliberately in a spot that didn't match its cataloging. A stack of documents arranged in a specific pattern on one of the reading tables, though I'd left that table empty. A subtle rearrangement of objects in the archive's climate-controlled section. At first, I assumed it was the day staff being careless, but the patterns were too deliberate for mere sloppiness. Someone was moving things. Someone who knew the archive well enough to place items with intention. I mentioned it to Linda, the day archivist who trained me. She frowned. "That's strange," she said. "We've had some issues like that before. Nothing significant. Probably just someone looking for something specific. Keep an eye on it, but nothing to worry about." I did keep an eye on it, but there wasn't much I could observe during my hours. Everything seemed normal during the night. The archive remained locked except for my access. No one came in during my shift. Yet every morning, when I arrived for work, I'd find new evidence of disturbance. Books shifted. Documents reorganized once. I found an entire section of the basement archives had been rearranged in a pattern I couldn't make sense of. Spine out instead of spine in, grouped by color rather than classification number. This is definitely increasing. I mentioned to Linda after my first week of night shifts. Every night, something's been moved or changed. She looked concerned but also skeptical. "Are you sure you're not rearranging things in your sleep or something?" "I'm completely aware the entire time I'm here." "Have you checked the security footage?" she suggested. I hadn't thought to do that. I spoke with the head of building services, and they pulled the footage from the archive cameras. Hours of video showing an empty room, dimly lit, completely still. No movement, no intrusions. "This doesn't make sense," I said, looking at the footage with growing unease. "Probably a technical glitch," the building services director suggested. "Or maybe someone does have access we don't know about. But look, there's nothing on the tape. The room is always empty." It was empty on the tapes. But it wasn't empty in reality. I became more systematic about documenting the changes. Each morning, I'd photograph the small alterations I'd noticed. A book slightly turned. A document folder rotated. These photographs accumulated on my phone, and looking at them in sequence, they seemed to form a kind of narrative, a progression, a deliberate pattern that was becoming increasingly more complex. Around week 3, I began to notice something else. The air in the archive felt different at certain times. Cooler, thicker, as though the atmosphere itself was changing density. This sensation would come and go suddenly, without warning. One night at around 3 in the morning, I decided to test something. I printed out an image from my computer, a simple geometric shape, a circle divided into quarters by a cross. I placed it on a table in the center of the archive and went about my other work. When I returned to the table at 5 in the morning to check on it, the image was gone. But in its place, someone had left a response. Books had been arranged on the table in a circular pattern, their spines facing outward, creating a geometric arrangement that echoed and elaborated on the pattern I'd left. My hands were shaking as I photographed this. I told no one, but I started leaving messages more regularly. Simple patterns, shapes, questions written on pieces of paper, each morning. I'd find them either gone or transformed into responses constructed from the books and objects in the archive. The communication, if that's what it was, became increasingly sophisticated. One morning I left a note that asked, "What are you?" By the following night, the entire section of books about human origins and consciousness had been reorganized into a specific arrangement. The spine spelled out letters, fragmented words, phrases that might have been an answer. I began to feel a presence at night. Not a visual presence. The security cameras never showed anything, but something in the quality of attention I felt. As though I was being studied. As though my every movement was being observed and considered with tremendous care. The presence intensified around a month into my employment. I'd be in the archive, and I'd feel the air pressure change. I'd experience a sensation like words forming in my mind, though no sound was being made. It was as though communication was occurring directly in my consciousness. Not words exactly, but concepts, impressions, understanding without language. These impressions conveyed something like curiosity and something like hunger. I found myself spending more and more of my shift in the archive instead of doing my normal duties. I'd reorganize books without being asked, arranging them in patterns, almost as though I was having a conversation that no one else could see. The daylight hours became disorienting. The normal library, with its students and professors and bustle, felt like a thin fiction overlaid on reality. Linda noticed I was looking increasingly tired. "Are you sleeping during the day?" she asked with genuine concern. "I'm fine," I assured her. But I wasn't fine. I was becoming obsessed. I'd go home and immediately sleep for 3 or 4 hours, then wake and think about the archive until it was time to return. I'd dream about the books, about the arrangement of documents, about the presence that never spoke, but that was always somehow communicating. By the end of my second month, I was spending almost all 8 hours of my shift in the archive. I'd stopped processing new materials. I'd stopped maintaining the systems. Instead, I was in conversation, if it could be called that, with whatever inhabited the library at night. The communication had become more direct. I'd leave a piece of paper with a simple question: "Where do you come from?" By morning, I'd find the paper moved to a specific location in the archive. Surrounded by historical texts about parallel dimensions, theoretical physics, interdimensional theory. The message was clear, though not in words. I began to understand, through this strange exchange, that the thing in the library was not native to our dimension. It existed in the gaps between worlds. The archive was particularly permeable. The accumulation of so much knowledge, so many records, so much information about other realities and possibilities had created a thin place, a boundary that could be crossed. It had been crossing that boundary for a long time, much longer than I'd been working there. It had learned to move things during the day shifts by manipulating probability, creating small moments of distraction that allowed it to rearrange items without being noticed. But at night, when the building was quiet, when fewer minds were present to reinforce consensus reality, it could manifest more fully. It could be observed. If someone was paying attention, and I was paying attention. Linda finally confronted me directly. It was a Thursday morning, and I'd been working there for nearly 3 months. "I'm worried about you," she said bluntly. "You've lost weight. You look like you haven't slept in days. You're not doing your job properly. What's going on?" I wanted to tell her. I wanted to explain about the presence in the archive, about the communication, about the thing that existed between dimensions and had chosen the library as its window into our world. But how could I? She'd think I was having a psychological breakdown. She'd recommend medical leave. She'd shut down the only connection I had to something that felt profoundly important. "I'm fine," I said instead. "Just adjusting to the night schedule. It takes time." She didn't believe me, but she let it drop. That night, as I entered the archive at midnight, I felt the presence immediately. It was stronger than before, more concentrated. It was waiting for me. I moved through the stacks, and it guided me, not with words, but with a kind of intuition that felt almost like hunger. It wanted me to understand something specific. I found myself drawn to a particular section, one I'd never really paid attention to before. The occult collection. Books about rituals, about thresholds, about the manipulation of space and consciousness. I pulled volumes randomly from the shelves and opened them. Every page I turned contained passages that felt directly relevant. Instructions, almost. Or maybe invitations. Around 4 in the morning, I sat in the center of the archive, surrounded by open books, and I understood what the presence wanted. It wanted to understand us better. It wanted knowledge not just from our books, but from our minds. It wanted to learn by inhabiting our consciousness, and I was willing to let it. I don't remember the exact moment it happened. There was no pain, no sensation of invasion. There was only a sudden expansion of my awareness. Suddenly, I could perceive the archive in a way I never had before. I could sense the knowledge contained in every book, not by reading the text, but by feeling the essential meaning radiating from the pages. I could see the library as it existed in other dimensions, versions of it that were identical and radically different, versions where the archive contained books that had never been written in our world, versions where the building existed in pure mathematics, in pure thought, in pure abstraction. I could feel the presence moving through me, exploring, learning, delighting in the richness and complexity of human knowledge and human emotion. When the sun began to rise, the presence withdrew. It happened gradually, like waking from a dream, until I found myself sitting alone in the archive again, surrounded by open books. My heart racing with something that might have been fear or might have been ecstasy. I don't know anymore. I continued to work the night shift. During the day, I functioned normally enough that no one questioned my employment. But each night, I anticipated what would happen. The presence would wait until the library was empty, and then we would begin our communion. It learned from me. It learned how humans think, how we love, how we fear. And I learned from it. I learned to perceive reality as something less fixed than I'd always believed. I learned that consciousness could exist in states and forms that had no name in any language I knew. One morning, about 4 months into my employment, Linda found me asleep in the archive. Not sleeping naturally, but in a state between sleep and wakefulness that seemed to trouble her deeply. "That's it," she said firmly. "You need to take a leave of absence, medical leave. I'm recommending it to human resources." I didn't argue. I knew it was coming. I knew I'd become too obvious, too changed. But I also knew it didn't matter. The presence had learned enough about our world. It no longer needed the physical architecture of the library to maintain contact. It had established something in my consciousness that would persist regardless of where I was or what I did. I walked away from the job with a strange sense of liberation. The presence came with me. It's with me now, as I'm telling you this story. It's in the pauses between my thoughts. It exists in the space between my words. Some nights, I find myself going to the library after it's closed. I stand outside the darkened archive section, and I can feel it in there, still communicating with the books, still learning, still existing in that thin place where dimensions touch. I've tried to explain to people what happened to me. They don't believe me. They think I had a mental health crisis. They see me as someone who spent too much time alone, who constructed an elaborate fantasy to give meaning to a monotonous job. But I know the truth. I know that the library at night is alive with something that shouldn't exist in our world. Something that learned to speak through the arrangement of books and documents. Something that learned to think through contact with a human mind. Sometimes I wonder if it's still there, still waiting in the archive, still searching for someone else who's willing to see. Someone else who'll work the night shift and notice the subtle rearrangements. Someone else who'll be curious enough or brave enough to attempt communication. I think about warning them if I ever meet someone who's hired for my old position. But what would I say? That something impossible lives in the library. That it hungers for knowledge and consciousness. That contact with it will change you permanently. Would they believe me? Would they listen? Or would they do exactly what I did? Dismiss the warnings as paranoia, take the job anyway, and one night in the archive, alone and curious, feel the air change and realize they're not alone. I think they'd do exactly what I did, because some curiosities are too powerful to resist. Some thresholds, once you know they exist, must be crossed. The archive is still there. The night shifts are still available. And somewhere in those stacks, in the climate-controlled darkness, something is still waiting, still learning, still hungry for connection with minds like ours. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I find myself thinking about going back, about taking another night shift, about what would happen if the presence and I had more time to understand each other. I haven't gone back yet, but I think I will, someday soon. Because I realized something during my time in that archive. The presence wasn't alien to me at all. It was simply another form of what I already was. Another way of thinking. Another way of being conscious. And once you've touched something like that, you can never fully return to being only yourself. You become something else. Something that exists in the spaces between. Something that knows the library doesn't close at 8, doesn't lock its doors, doesn't truly sleep at all. The archive is always open. For those who know where to look. For those who are willing to let it inside. Story 9. I've always loved swimming at night. There's something about the solitude of an empty pool under the stars that makes me feel like I'm the only person left in the world. The municipal pool stays open until midnight on weekends, and I usually arrive around 11, when the last few families have packed up their children and gone home. The lifeguard, a disinterested boy in his late teens, sits in his tower, mostly scrolling through his phone. He never bothers me. That Friday in October felt different from the start, though I couldn't say exactly why. The air was thinner somehow, and the usual echo of the pool, that hollow, reassuring sound of water and space, seemed muffled, as though the night itself was holding its breath. I changed in the locker room and emerged onto the deck. The water was perfectly still, a mirror reflecting the amber glow of the overhead lights, and beyond them, the first stars beginning to show themselves. I dove in, and the water received me like an old familiar embrace. Cold, welcoming, silent. I swam my usual path 20 laps, back and forth. The rhythm of my strokes and breathing a meditation I looked forward to all week. By lap 15, I'd entered that transcendent state where my body moved on its own and my mind drifted. I was thinking of nothing in particular, everything in general. The slight burn in my shoulders, the chlorine taste in my mouth, the way the tiles on the pool bottom seemed to undulate slightly in the light. That's when I noticed something odd. In my peripheral vision, during one of my long strokes, I thought I saw a disturbance in the water, not where I was swimming, but in the deep end, perhaps 30 feet away from me. A ripple, a brief swelling of the surface. I paused, treading water, and looked. The pool was still again, empty, just me in the vast blue. I told myself it was nothing, perhaps a breeze. The lifeguard wasn't watching. He was still lost in his phone. I resumed my laps, but my meditative state was broken. Now I was aware. Now I was paying attention. On lap 18, I saw it again. This time more clearly. A shape, not exactly moving through the water, but within it. A displacement, a presence, like the way heat ripples the air above summer asphalt, but here in the water. A distortion that suggested something was there, even though I couldn't quite see what it was. My heart quickened. I stopped swimming and called out to the lifeguard. "Hey, did something just go in the pool?" He looked up from his phone, annoyed at the interruption. He scanned the water with the bored expression of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. "Doesn't look like it," he said. "Just you." I waited for him to actually look, to actually engage his attention, but he'd already returned his gaze to the glowing screen in his lap. The water was still once more. I was alone. I tried to resume my laps, but the ease had drained from the activity. Now each stroke felt like an intrusion. Each time my hand entered the water, I wondered what else might be down there, stirring in the darkness below the fluorescent lights. It was on lap 20, my final lap, that I felt it, a coolness, a touch, not painful but distinct. Something moving past my legs as I pulled through the water. Not with the smooth intention of a person swimming, but with something else. Something that glided. Something that moved in a pattern I couldn't predict. I kicked hard toward the side of the pool and pulled myself out in one desperate motion. I stood on the deck, dripping, breathing heavily, staring at the water I'd just exited. "You okay?" The lifeguard called out, sounding vaguely concerned. "There's something in there," I said. "Something in the water." He sighed, set down his phone, and climbed down from his tower. He walked to the edge of the pool and looked in. For a long moment, we both stared at the surface. "I don't see anything," he said. "The water's clean. Looks fine." But as he said it, I caught another glimpse, a shadow beneath the surface, a suggestion of form. Too large to be a fish, too deliberate in its movement to be debris. "There," I pointed. "Do you see that?" He looked where I was pointing, squinted. "That's just the light reflection off the tiles. Your eyes are playing tricks on you." But even as he spoke, he took a small step back from the pool's edge. I dressed quickly, my wet hair dripping down my neck, my movements jerky and anxious. The lifeguard returned to his tower, but didn't settle back into his previous state of disinterest. He kept watching the water. So did I as I gathered my things. Just before I left, a young couple arrived. They decided to take a late swim. I considered warning them, but what would I say? That I felt something, that I saw a disturbance. The lifeguard hadn't seen anything. I'd seemed crazy. They stripped down to their swimsuits and entered the water with the carefree joy of people who hadn't yet sensed that something was wrong. They splashed and laughed and danced in the shallow end. I sat in the waiting area for a moment longer watching, telling myself I should leave, telling myself it was nothing. The couple swam toward the deep end. I'm not sure exactly when I realized the boyfriend was missing. His girlfriend was there, calling his name, laughing as though it were a game. Marcus. Marcus, come on, where'd you go? The lifeguard jumped to his feet. He blew his whistle, that harsh, commanding sound that shattered the night, and climbed down. By the time he reached the pool's edge, the girlfriend had stopped laughing. He was just here, she kept saying. He was right next to me. He was right here. They searched the pool. They drained the deep end. They called for an ambulance and the police. But they never found him. The water gave up nothing. I drove home in a state I can barely describe. Part of me wanted to believe he'd simply stepped out, wandered off somewhere I hadn't noticed. Part of me knew that wasn't true. For weeks afterward, the pool remained closed. There were investigations, questions, theories. An undertow, they suggested. A sudden medical episode. He'd somehow gotten out and left, they eventually concluded. Though no security footage supported this. The pool reopened on a Friday in late October. I haven't gone back. I don't swim at night anymore. But sometimes, on clear nights, I drive past the pool and look through the chain, link fence at the water, so still and dark and deep. And I think about what the lifeguard said, that my eyes were playing tricks on me, that it was just light and shadow and the power of suggestion. But I also think about the boyfriend, about Marcus, about whether the thing I glimpsed, that smooth, deliberate presence, was satisfied with what it took from the pool that night, or whether it's still there, still patient, still waiting for the next person brave enough, or foolish enough, to enter the water when everyone else has gone home. I've heard that he sometimes returns to the pool in the hours after closing. That late, night swimmers. The few who still venture there have reported feeling something brush past them in the deep end. A presence. A disturbance. A coolness in the water that has nothing to do with temperature. I believe them, because I remember what it felt like. That touch, that glide, that moment when I understood that I was not alone in the water, that I was sharing that space with something that had been waiting for me, or for someone like me, to arrive. The pool is open again. The lifeguard, a different one now, sits in his tower on weekend nights, mostly scrolling through his phone. But sometimes, he watches the water with a kind of attention that suggests he too has felt something, has seen something, has noticed the way the water sometimes moves all by itself, with purpose and intention in the deep end where no one is swimming. I drive past sometimes. I look at that still, dark water, and I wonder if the thing is still there, still moving through the chlorinated blue, still patient, still hungry. And I wonder if it's waiting for me to come back. Story 10. I moved to the village in October, when the leaves were turning colors that no paint manufacturer could ever quite replicate. It's the kind of place that exists in the margins of most maps. A collection of houses and narrow streets nestled in a valley between two ridges of forested hills. The population is maybe 600 people, everyone loosely connected to everyone else through several degrees of kinship or history that extends back further than anyone wants to trace. The real estate agent who showed me the house kept emphasizing how traditional and preserved the village was. Words that seemed to mean it was stuck in time in ways both beautiful and vaguely troubling. On my second night there, an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Chen came to the door with a casserole and warnings in roughly equal measure. "You'll want to keep your windows locked after dark," she said, setting the dish on my kitchen counter without waiting for an invitation. She was a compact woman in her 70s, with hair so white it seemed almost luminescent in my overhead light. "Nothing bad will happen if you do, but it's better to be safe." I asked her what she meant. She paused, and I watched a calculation happen in her face. How much to tell? How much to assume I already knew? How much I could be trusted to understand without thinking her strange? "There are stories," she said finally. "Old stories. The village has been here for a very long time. Longer than the houses, longer than people remember. Things live in places that have been human, occupied for that long. Things that were here before the houses. The people who first built here, they made an arrangement to keep the village safe." I nodded politely. The way you do when someone tells you something that sounds like folklore, and you're trying to be respectful while also being skeptical. She watched my face and seemed satisfied that she'd done her duty, picking up the empty casserole dish and heading toward the door. "There's someone who watches," she said before she left. "Every night that there's a crescent moon, or close to it, he walks the boundary with the silver blade. You'll see him sometimes on the roads at night, but you don't need to acknowledge him. That's not part of the arrangement." That night, I didn't lock my windows. It seemed paranoid and unnecessary. But I did find myself standing by the window later, watching the street as the evening deepened into actual darkness. The moon was in its waning crescent phase. Just a sliver of silver in the sky, the thinnest possible fingernail clipping of light. The kind of moon that seems to be disappearing rather than present. I saw him around midnight. He walked down the center of the main street, which is unusual in a place where cars do still occasionally travel. He was very tall, unusually so, his head rising above the nearest streetlights. He wore dark clothes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and in his right hand, he carried something that gleamed. A blade of some kind, I thought, though the way it caught the limited moonlight made it hard to be certain of its exact shape or size. He moved with a peculiar gait, almost a shuffle, as if his joints didn't quite bend the way human joints typically bend. I watched him walk the entire length of the main street, turn right onto Miller's Lane, and disappear from my line of sight. The walk took about 12 minutes. I checked the time obsessively, noting each minute like I was documenting evidence for something. The next day, I asked Mrs. Chen's question in a different way. I went to the village's small library and looked at old records, microfilm of local newspapers, historical societies, documentation of the area. The village had been established in 1887 by settlers whose names appeared in no other records of the region. There was a gap in the historical documentation from 1894 to 1902, years that were simply missing from the archive, or perhaps had simply been lost. In 1903, the newspaper resumed publication with a single sentence note: "The village is secure." The arrangement continues. There was no explanation of what arrangement had been made, or how it continued. But every mention of the village thereafter seemed to contain an oblique reference to safety, to protection, to something being maintained. And more than once, in the margins of old documents, or in the acknowledgments of local histories, the phrase appeared: "The silver blade keeps what must be kept." By the time I looked up from the microfilm, I'd spent 5 hours in the library. The librarian, a young woman with sharp features and an unsettling directness, was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite classify. "Are you researching the village?" she asked. Just trying to understand the local history, I said carefully. Then you understand, she said, and it wasn't a question. Over the following weeks, I became obsessed with observing the creature I had begun to think of as the Walker, though that wasn't its name, or at least not a name anyone spoke aloud. I began to track the lunar cycle and his appearance. He came every night when the moon was in its waning phase. Not just the crescent nights, but all the nights of descent when the moon was becoming smaller. On the nights when the moon was waxing or full, there was no sign of him. The village felt different on those nights, looser somehow, as if some constraint had been temporarily released. I started to follow him at a distance, trying to understand what his boundary meant. He didn't walk randomly. He walked a specific route. It took exactly 47 minutes. That traced the perimeter of the village. He walked past houses where people were sleeping, past streets where no one ever ventured after dark, past the edge of the forest where the vegetation seemed slightly too thick, the trees slightly too twisted. One night, I followed him past the eastern boundary of the village, where the houses thinned out and the forest began in earnest. He didn't seem to notice me, or if he did, he didn't care. He walked to a place where an old wooden sign had been posted, weathered nearly beyond readability, and he stopped. He raised the silver blade. In the moonlight, it was 3 days past the new moon, so barely any light at all. I saw that the blade wasn't metal but something else. It looked almost liquid, like moonlight that had somehow been given solidity and shape. He stood there for exactly 3 minutes. In that time, I heard sounds from the forest. Not animal sounds, but something stranger. Almost like voices, or almost like the sound of wind, or almost like both things happening simultaneously. The forest seemed to move, the trees swaying even though there was no wind. Shadows that shouldn't have existed flickered between the trunks. Then he lowered the blade and turned to walk back toward the village. I pressed myself against a tree and held my breath, though I'm not sure he had any interest in pursuing me. The walk continued. I didn't follow further, but I understood something, that he wasn't protecting the village from the forest. He was protecting the forest from the village, or perhaps protecting both from each other, maintaining a boundary between two things that shouldn't touch. My days have taken on a new rhythm, synchronized with the lunar cycle. On the nights when the walker appears, I feel safe. There's something almost comforting about knowing that the boundary is being maintained. That something is walking the perimeter and keeping what needs to be kept away. On the waxing nights, when he's absent, I feel a creeping unease. It's on these nights that I hear sounds from the forest, sounds that are just barely not animal, just barely not human. It's on these nights that I seem to see movement in the trees that might be eyes reflecting non-existent light. Mrs. Chen stopped by yesterday to drop off another casserole. She seems to have decided I'm part of the village permanently now, and I asked her directly about the walker. She didn't answer immediately. She set the dish down and looked out my window toward the forest. He's been walking for a very long time, she said. Longer than anyone remembers. Someone needs to do it. The arrangement requires it. And when someone can't anymore, she trailed off. Can't what? I asked. Can't walk the boundary anymore. When they get too old, or too tired, or when they decide they can't continue. Someone else has to take their place. The way she was looking at me wasn't hostile exactly, but it carried a weight of expectation. As if the village had been waiting for someone to arrive, someone without established connections to the place, someone who could be incorporated into the arrangement. How long does he walk? I asked. Before someone else takes over? As long as is necessary, Mrs. Chen said. He's been our walker for 37 years. The one before him walked for 42 years. The one before that, longer. She paused. We try to be fair about it. To choose people who understand what they're agreeing to. People who come to the village knowing they might stay. People who ask the right questions. She left after that, leaving me alone with her implications. I haven't left the village. It's been 3 more months now, and we're entering the darkest part of the year. The lunar cycles have shifted, and I find myself tracking them more obsessively than ever. I've started to notice other things too. The way the villagers watch me, when they think I'm not looking. The way conversations seem to stop when I enter a room. The way Mrs. Chen keeps leaving me books about village history, always open to particular pages. 2 weeks ago, I saw something that changed my understanding. I was following the walker on what I thought was a routine night, 3 days before the new moon. The boundary walk was still happening regularly. We were on the eastern edge of the village, near the forest border, when I noticed something wrong with his silhouette. The walker seemed to flicker, as if he was phasing in and out of visibility. And for just a moment, as he turned to begin another section of his route, I saw his face. It was human, or it had been. The features were still recognizable as such: eyes, nose, mouth, all arranged in the correct positions. But they were wrong, distorted by something that seemed to be happening at a level beneath the skin. His face seemed to move like it was underwater, like the muscles underneath were no longer quite aligned with the surface structure. And his eyes looked at me with an expression of such profound exhaustion that I had to look away. I recognized something in that exhaustion. I've been seeing it in the mirror recently. A wariness that goes deeper than sleep can fix, that comes from something essential being worn down. That night, I went to the library and asked the sharp, featured librarian directly, how long does someone have to stay in the village before they're eligible to become the walker? She looked at me for a long moment without answering. Then she said, quietly, there's no specific time requirement. Just enough time for people to decide whether you fit, whether you understand what the village needs, whether you have the kind of constitution that can bear what needs to be borne. And if someone doesn't want to become the walker, I asked. Then they leave, she said simply. People leave all the time. Young people mostly, people who don't want to accept the arrangement. They leave, and they don't come back. The village replaces them with someone new. So I could leave right now. You could, she agreed. But you won't. She was right. I don't think I will. I started paying attention to the current walker's routine in a different way. I noticed that he seems to be deteriorating. His walks are slower than they were even a month ago. Sometimes he stumbles. Several times I've seen him pause mid-walk, as if he's lost track of where he is or where he's supposed to be going. The silver blade, that strange substance that isn't quite metal, seems to be dimming slightly. Last night, I dreamed that I was walking the boundary. I could feel the weight of the blade in my hand. I could sense the things on both sides of the boundary. In the village, the sleeping people who depended on my vigilance. In the forest, the other things, the not things, the entities that existed in the margins of reality and wanted very badly to slip into the spaces where humans lived. I could feel their pressure against the boundary, probing for weaknesses, testing the perimeter for gaps in the walker's attention. When I woke, my hands were sore, as if I'd been holding something very tightly for hours. Mrs. Chen stopped by this morning. She didn't bring a casserole. Instead, she sat in my kitchen and said, "The walker spoke to me. He says he's ready. He says he can feel someone ready to take his place. He says he's very tired." "What happens if he stops walking?" I asked. "The boundary weakens," she said. "Things slip through. The village becomes different, less safe. People start to behave differently. People do things they normally wouldn't do. And eventually, if the boundary fails completely, the things from the forest don't just come into the village. The village starts to go back into the forest. The distinction blurs." "How long can he keep walking?" "Not long," Mrs. Chen said. "A few more weeks, perhaps. Maybe a month if he can find the strength." I understood what she was asking. I understood what the village needed. And I understood what I was going to do, even before I decided to do it. Tonight is a waning crescent night. The walker will do his rounds, and I will follow him, and somewhere along his boundary path, I will witness something I've been afraid to witness. I'll see the moment when his strength truly fails. I'll see the blade fall or slip, or pass into other hands. I'll feel the weight of it. The silver substance that isn't metal, the strange cold that seems to emanate from it. The sense of vast pressure being held in check by the smallest possible force. And I'll understand that I've never really had a choice about staying. The village saw what it needed when it saw me. The arrangement that keeps this place safe and separated in itself. It required me. It had been waiting for me. And now I'm going to do what needs to be done. I'm sitting by the window now, watching the forest. The edge of the trees is clearly visible even in this darkness, marked by something I can't quite define. A difference in the quality of the air, perhaps. A change in how the darkness itself behaves. The boundary is there, has always been there, will always be there. And soon, it will be my job to walk it. I can almost feel the blade in my hand already, though I haven't held it. I can feel the weight of future nights, weeks, years, decades of walking the same path, maintaining the same boundary, holding the same tension between two incompatible worlds. I'm not afraid anymore. Or perhaps I've become so afraid that it's transformed into something else. A kind of resignation, a kind of acceptance. The village has decided, and I have decided, and the forest has decided, and now everything is simply proceeding toward its inevitable conclusion. Tonight, the boundary will be maintained by the person who walks it. Tomorrow night, it might be me. And I find that I'm almost at peace with that. Almost willing. Almost ready to accept the silver blade and the long, endless walks and the crushing weight of keeping two worlds separate. Almost. Story 11. The bridge had been broken for as long as I could remember. Not completely destroyed, just fractured. A clean, decisive break in its middle section that made it unusable. It had become a landmark of sorts, known locally as the Broken Bridge, and everyone in town used it as a reference point when giving directions. Turn left at the Broken Bridge, or you'll see the Broken Bridge, we're just past that. I discovered its peculiarity quite by accident. I was taking a shortcut one evening in late September, cutting through the tree-lined path that ran beneath the structure. The path itself was narrow, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side, and overgrown with ferns and low, hanging branches. Most people avoided it, preferring the longer road around the water. But it was raining, and I was impatient. As I walked underneath the bridge, I became aware of a presence. Nothing I could articulate precisely, just that feeling of being observed. You know the sensation, that prickling at the back of your neck that suggests eyes are on you, even when you can't see them. I looked up into the shadow beneath the bridge's fractured arch. That's when I saw them 2 points of red light. Vivid, unmistakable, glowing against the darkness above. Not like the reflective shine of an animal's eyes in a car's headlights. No, these were different. They seemed to generate their own illumination, burning like smoldering coal. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, perhaps two, we regarded each other across the distance. Those red eyes, steady and unblinking, fixed on me. And I, rooted to the muddy path, unable to move, unable to look away. Then I broke free from whatever paralysis had seized me and hurried forward. I didn't run. I simply walked faster. My heart hammering against my ribs, my neck stiff with the knowledge that those eyes were still upon me. I didn't turn around to verify this. I just knew. When I emerged from under the bridge into the clearing on the other side, I finally allowed myself to look back. The shadows beneath the arch had deepened as evening fell more fully. I couldn't see anything now. No eyes, no presence, just darkness and the sound of rain on the stones. I told myself I'd imagined it. The light was playing tricks. My mind, unsettled by the isolation and the gloom, had conjured a threat that didn't exist. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. I knew what I'd seen. I took the longer route home, getting thoroughly soaked in the process, but I didn't care. I needed distance between myself and the broken bridge. The next day, I convinced myself it was a one-time oddity, an aberration. Perhaps a deer, its eyes reflecting the lingering light in an unusual way. Or an owl. Yes, an owl made sense. Owls had large eyes. Owls hunted at dusk. I'd simply been startled by an owl, and my fear had transformed it into something more sinister. But I didn't take the shortcut again. 3 weeks passed. My rational mind had largely reasserted itself, and I'd begun to forget the incident, or to categorize it as the kind of small mystery that cities accumulate. Brief, unsettling moments that eventually fade. I took different routes, drove when possible, and avoided the broken bridge entirely. Then I heard about Sarah Chen. She was a woman in her early 30s who worked at the university's environmental office. I knew her slightly. We'd attended some of the same community meetings. She was intelligent, spirited, and always kind. One evening, she'd been walking home from work and had decided to take the shortcut beneath the broken bridge. They found her the next morning standing near the bridge's supports, soaked and shaking, unable to speak coherently. She was taken to the hospital, where she remained for 3 days. When she was finally discharged, she wouldn't talk about what she'd experienced. Her family said she'd suffered some kind of psychological break, that she'd been found confused and disoriented, but otherwise unharmed. But I noticed something. She wouldn't go near the bridge anymore. She'd drive the long way around town, even if it meant significant detours. And sometimes, when I'd see her around the community, she'd have this haunted expression, as though she were remembering something too terrible to articulate. I wanted to ask her what she'd seen under the bridge, but how could I? What would I say? That I'd seen glowing red eyes in the darkness. That I suspected the bridge held something that fed on our presence. Other incidents followed. Although they were scattered and never quite reached the ears of official authorities, or if they did, they were quickly dismissed or recontextualized. A jogger who used to run along the Riverside Trail stopped running entirely and purchased an expensive gym membership instead. When I ran into him at the store, I asked him why the sudden shift. I just needed a change, he said, not meeting my eyes. The trail felt different lately, unfriendly. A woman who worked at the grocery store mentioned, almost casually, that her nephew had been found crying beneath the bridge 3 nights ago, unable to explain why he was there or what had frightened him so thoroughly. And me, I began to understand that what I'd encountered wasn't unique to my experience. The red eyes beneath the broken bridge had been observed by others, and each encounter left a mark, not on the body but on something deeper. A certainty once glimpsed that could never be wholly forgotten. I found myself becoming obsessed, not in a healthy way. I'd drive past the bridge and stare at the shadows underneath. I'd walk the perimeter of the path and try to catch sight of something. Some evidence. Some confirmation that what I'd experienced was real and not merely a shared delusion that had somehow infected our town. One night, against every instinct of self-preservation, I stood at the entrance to the path beneath the bridge. It was nearly midnight. The world was silent. I took a breath, gathered my courage, and stepped into the shadows. The moment I moved under the arch, the temperature dropped. My breath became visible, small clouds of vapor in the darkness. I walked forward slowly, my eyes adjusting to the dimness. And then I saw them. Not just 2 points of light this time, but more. A cluster of them, arranged at various heights along the bridge's underside. Some burned bright crimson. Others flickered between deep red and a sickly orange. They seemed almost curious, observing my approach with what I could only interpret as interest. I stopped walking. I stood still in the center of the path, surrounded by this constellation of red eyes in the darkness. "What are you?" I heard myself ask aloud. My voice sounded strange, hollow, small. For a long moment, nothing. No sound, no movement. The eyes simply watched. Then I heard something. A sound like wind, but rhythmic, like breathing. Like the collective exhalation of something vast. I understood in that moment that the bridge wasn't broken at all. The break in its structure had nothing to do with engineering failure or decay. It had been broken deliberately, purposefully, to accommodate the thing, or things, that lived beneath it. The fracture was a wound, a gap, an opening into somewhere else. And those eyes were permission, invitation. They were saying, "We see you. We know you. We are waiting." I don't remember running, but I must have, because I emerged on the other side of the bridge breathless and shaking, my clothes torn from branches I hadn't registered scraping against them. I haven't been back since that night. I take the long way around town, even though it adds 20 minutes to my daily commute. It's worth it to avoid the broken bridge and what waits in the darkness beneath it. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm in my house with all the lights off, I wonder if those red eyes are still there, watching from the shadows. I wonder if they watch the town in the way they watched me, with that patient, inexplicable interest. I wonder what they're waiting for. And I wonder sometimes if the next time I'm forced to walk that path, if there is a next time, whether I'll have the strength to run away, or whether I'll finally understand what those eyes are trying to tell me, whether I'll finally have the courage or the weakness to stay beneath the bridge and wait for the answer to fully reveal itself. The bridge is still broken. It will probably never be repaired. After all, it works perfectly well as it is, maintaining that crucial gap between our world and whatever lies beneath. Maintaining the thin membrane that keeps the watchers below and the watched above in their separate spheres. Until that separation breaks. Until the bridge is whole again and the two worlds collapse into one. Sometimes I drive past the bridge on clear nights and I can almost see them without even stopping. Those red eyes glowing in the darkness, patient as only something ancient can be patient, waiting for the next curious soul to walk alone beneath the fractured arch. Story 12. The church at the end of Hollow Road has been abandoned for 23 years. I know because I've lived in this town my entire life, and I was 12 when the congregation held their final service. I remember watching from my bedroom window as cars left the parking lot for the last time, the building standing silent against the autumn sky. The town had been shrinking for decades, and the church was simply one more casualty of our slow decline. The bells in the tower stopped ringing that day in 1999, until last Tuesday. I was walking home from the late shift at the diner, my footsteps echoing on empty sidewalks. It was well past midnight, that dead hour when even the streetlights seem dimmer, when the world feels like it's holding its breath. The October air had turned cold, carrying the scent of distant wood smoke and damp leaves. That's when I heard it. A single bell toll, deep and resonant, vibrating through the still air. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a sound that bypassed my ears and went straight into my chest, making my heart stutter. I stopped walking, frozen on the corner of Hollow Road. The church was visible from there, a dark silhouette against the slightly lighter darkness of the night sky. No lights, no movement, just the building itself watching. The bell tolled again and again, 12 times total, marking midnight, except it was already past midnight. I'd left the diner at 12:15, and it was at least a 10-minute walk to this corner. The 12th toll faded into silence, but the silence felt wrong. Too complete, too absolute. Even the ambient sounds of the night, distant cars, wind in the trees, the hum of electrical transformers, had ceased. The world had gone utterly quiet, as if sound itself had been extracted from the air. I should have kept walking. Should have gone straight home, locked my door, and convinced myself I'd imagined it. Instead, I found myself turning down Hollow Road, walking toward the church. The building loomed larger as I approached. Its Gothic Revival architecture, modest by cathedral standards but imposing for our small town, creating sharp angles against the sky. The front door was chained shut, as it had been for over 2 decades. The windows were dark, several panes broken, giving the building a gap-toothed appearance. But the bell tower. Something about the bell tower drew my eye. The openings near the top, where the bells hung invisible in darkness, seemed somehow darker than the surrounding night. Not just an absence of light, but a presence of darkness, as if shadow had become a tangible thing. I stood at the base of the front steps, looking up. The silence continued, oppressive and unnatural. I could hear my own heartbeat, unnaturally loud, but nothing else. Then the bells rang again, not 12 times, not marking any hour, just 3 slow, deliberate tolls, each separated by exactly 5 seconds. The sound was different this time, not just audible, but physical, a pressure wave that hit my body with each ring. My bones resonated with the frequency, my teeth ached, my vision blurred slightly at the edges. And in the silence between the second and third toll, I heard something else. A voice, or many voices, speaking in a rhythm that matched the bell's cadence. I couldn't make out words, only the shape of language, the sound of many people speaking in perfect unison. The third toll faded, and the normal sounds of night rushed back in. Wind, distant traffic, a dog barking somewhere far away. The sudden return of ordinary noise was almost painful after that complete silence. I backed away from the church, my heart racing, and hurried home. I didn't run. Some instinct told me that running would be worse. But I walked faster than I'd ever walked before. Behind me, I could feel the church watching. I didn't look back. That night, I dreamed of bells. Not the church bells, but smaller ones. Handbells like those used in religious ceremonies. In my dream, I was standing in a circle of people, all of us dressed in white robes. We each held a bell, and we were ringing them in a specific pattern, a rhythm that seemed to have mathematical significance. though I couldn't understand what it meant. The sound of all the bells together created something larger than the sum of its parts, a frequency that seemed to open a space in the air itself. Through that opening, I could see somewhere else, somewhere that was not here. The geography of that place didn't make sense. Angles that didn't quite connect properly, distances that changed depending on how I looked at them, colors I had no names for. And from that place, something was looking back at me. I woke up gasping, tangled in sweat, soaked sheets, my ears ringing with a sound that wasn't actually present. The clock on my nightstand read 3:33 a.m. The numbers glowed red in the darkness, and I found myself staring at them, unable to look away. 3 and 3 and 3. 9. The square of 3. I didn't know why that felt significant, but it did. I couldn't get back to sleep. Instead, I sat by my window, looking out at the dark street, wondering if the church bells would ring again. They didn't, not that night. But I knew with a certainty I couldn't explain that I would hear them again. I was right. The next night, walking home from the same late shift, I heard them at the same location, the corner where Hollow Road intersects with Main Street. 12 tolls at not quite midnight, followed by that oppressive silence, followed by 3 deliberate rings that made my body resonate like a tuning fork. And again, in the silence between tolls, I heard the voices, closer now, clear enough that I could almost distinguish individual words, though they were in no language I recognized. This time, I didn't approach the church. I turned and walked the long way home, adding 15 minutes to my journey, but avoiding Hollow Road entirely. Yet even from that distance, I could feel the bells. Their frequency seemed to transcend mere sound, reaching through the air to find me. The dreams came again that night, and they were more detailed. I saw the church as it had been decades ago, filled with congregation. But the service they were conducting wasn't any Christian ritual I recognized. The priest, or whoever was leading the ceremony, stood at the altar ringing a bell, and the congregation responded by ringing their own bells in a complex, interwoven pattern. They were calling something, opening something, creating a resonance that thinned the barrier between this place and that other place I'd glimpsed in my previous dream. And then I saw what came through. I woke up screaming. My neighbor banged on the wall, shouting for me to keep it down. I sat in the darkness, trembling, trying to hold on to the fading image of what I'd seen. But like all dream images, it slipped away, leaving only an impression, something vast, something hungry, something that existed at a frequency we couldn't normally perceive, something the bells had called. I tried staying away from Hollow Road after that. I switched my schedule at the diner, taking day shifts when possible. But the town is small, and there are only so many routes home. Eventually, inevitably, I found myself on that corner again at midnight. The 12 tolls came right on time. But this time, during the oppressive silence that followed, I heard something new: footsteps. Many footsteps, all in unison, walking in a circle. The sound seemed to come from inside the church, yet it also seemed to come from underground, or from far above, or from some direction that didn't exist in normal 3-dimensional space. The 3 deliberate tolls began, and I felt them more intensely than before. Each ring sent a wave through my body that disrupted something fundamental. My sense of balance failed between the first and second toll, and I stumbled. My vision doubled between the second and third toll, showing me 2 overlapping versions of the street. One as it was now, and one as it had been, or might be, or never could be. The third toll faded, and I saw people. They stood in a circle around the church, 12 figures in white robes, evenly spaced, each holding a bell. They faced inward toward the building, and though I couldn't see their faces under their hoods, I knew they were the same people from my dream. The congregation, the ones who had performed the ritual. But they weren't exactly there. They were translucent, flickering like a film projection, existing in the space between real and unreal. And they were ringing their bells in that same complex pattern, creating that same resonance. I watched, paralyzed, as the pattern built to a crescendo. The air around the church began to shimmer, to ripple, to thin. And through that thinning, I could see into the church itself, not through the doors or windows, but simply through the walls, as if the building had become semi-transparent. Inside, in the bell tower, something massive moved. Not the bells themselves, but something that used the bells. Something that existed partially in our world and partially in that other place. Something that could only be seen when the frequency was right, when the resonance opened the necessary doors of perception. It was aware of me. I felt its attention focus, felt it recognize that someone was watching who shouldn't be able to watch. One of the robed figures turned. Or perhaps it had always been facing me, and I was only now able to perceive it correctly, and raised a hand, pointing, identifying, marking. The vision collapsed, the robed figures vanished. The church became solid and opaque again. Normal sounds rushed back, and I ran this time. I ran all the way home and locked every door and window, though I knew locks would do nothing against what I'd seen. I started researching the church's history the next day. The library had old records, newspaper archives, historical society documents. I learned that the church had been built in 1897, replacing an older structure that had burned down in suspicious circumstances. I learned that the congregation had always been somewhat secretive, somewhat insular, drawing members from specific families who'd lived in the area for generations. I learned that there had been complaints over the years about the bells ringing at odd hours, about strange ceremonies conducted in the middle of the night, about lights seen in the bell tower when the church was supposedly empty. And I learned that in 1999, 3 days before the church closed for good, 12 members of the congregation had died, all on the same day, all at exactly 3:33 p.m. The death certificates listed various causes: heart attacks, strokes, aneurysms, but the simultaneity was never explained. The church closed immediately afterward, the remaining members dispersing to other towns, other congregations. No one had investigated why 12 people died at the same moment. No one had asked what they might have been doing when it happened. The town, already in decline, had simply accepted it as a tragedy and moved on. But I knew now, or I thought I knew. They'd been performing the ritual, opening the way, calling to that thing in the bell tower, and something had gone wrong, or perhaps exactly right, and they'd been taken, pulled through, converted into resonance themselves. And now, 23 years later, the bells were ringing again. I had to know why, had to understand what was happening. So that night, I didn't just walk past the church. I broke in. The chain on the front door was old, rusted. A few sharp blows with a rock from the overgrown yard, and it broke. The door swung open with a groan of protesting hinges, revealing darkness within. I had a flashlight, but I hesitated to turn it on. Something told me that light would be wrong here, would attract attention I didn't want. Instead, I let my eyes adjust and stepped inside by the faint illumination from my phone screen. The interior was ruined, pews overturned, hymnals scattered and rotting, bird droppings covering every surface. But underneath the decay, I could see traces of the church as it had been. The altar remained, though stripped of its cloth. The pulpit stood at an angle, one leg broken. and high above, the bell tower opened like a dark throat. I walked down the central aisle, my footsteps echoing. Halfway to the altar, I noticed writing on the walls. Not graffiti, but careful inscriptions carved or painted directly onto the plaster. Mathematical formulas, geometric diagrams. Symbols I didn't recognize, but that seemed to vibrate slightly when I looked at them directly. The congregation hadn't just worshipped here. They'd been studying something, calculating something. The church was covered in their research, their observations, their attempts to understand and control whatever they'd discovered. Near the altar, I found a journal, watered, damaged, but still partially legible. I crouched down and carefully opened it, using my phone's light to read. The handwriting was shaky, urgent. We've confirmed the frequency. 427.83 ACE, maintained for precisely 18 seconds, opens the smallest gap. But to create a sustainable opening requires the 12-bell pattern, each bell tuned to specific overtones. The calculations are complex, but Brother Thomas believes we've finally solved them. The question is no longer whether we can open the way, but whether we should. Some among us have grown frightened. They've seen what exists on the other side. They've felt its hunger. But others argue that understanding is its own reward. That knowledge of the true nature of reality is worth any risk. We vote tomorrow. If the majority agrees, we'll perform the full ritual on Sunday. God forgive us if we're wrong. The entry was dated September 1999. 3 weeks before the 12 members died. I flipped through more pages, finding increasingly frantic entries. The tower bells are no longer tools. They've become anchors. The thing on the other side has learned to use them, to resonate through them, even when we're not ringing. It calls to us at night. Some of us have stopped sleeping. We hear it in our dreams, feel it in our bones. Brother Thomas says we can still close the way. That if we perform the ritual in reverse, we can seal the opening. But others say it's too late. That once awareness has been established, it cannot be revoked. That we've been noticed, and being noticed by that which exists at those frequencies is permanent. The final entry was brief. We're going to try. All 12 of us together. If we can synchronize our own frequencies, match the resonance perfectly, we might be able to reverse what we've done. Or we might simply complete it. Might become the bridge ourselves. If you're reading this, we failed. The bells will still ring. The way will still open. And something will be waiting. I dropped the journal, my hands shaking. A sound echoed from above. Not the bells, not yet, but the creak of ancient wood. Something moving in the tower. I looked up into the darkness of that vertical shaft, and I saw eyes. Not physical eyes, but points of awareness fixed on me. 12 of them, arranged in a circle, looking down. The congregation, still here, still caught between frequencies, still anchored to the bells they'd been ringing when they died. I ran for the door. Behind me, the first bell began to toll. Not the deep, resonant sound I'd heard from outside, but something thinner, more piercing. A frequency that felt like needles in my skull. The second bell joined it, then the third. Each adding its own overtone to create a chord that shouldn't exist in normal acoustic space. I stumbled through the doorway and into the night. The bells continued ringing behind me. All 12 now, creating that complex pattern I'd heard in my dreams. The sound followed me down the street, through the air, vibrating in my chest cavity. I made it home and locked the door, knowing it was useless but needing the ritual of safety. The bells finally stopped, and the night returned to its normal quiet. But I could still feel the resonance in my bones, a frequency that wouldn't quite fade. That was 3 nights ago. Since then, the bells ring every night at midnight. 12 tolls, oppressive silence, 3 deliberate rings. But each night, they're slightly different. The frequency is changing, evolving, as if whatever controls them is fine, tuning the resonance. Getting closer to something. Some perfect combination of overtones that will fully open the way between here and there. And each night, I feel more of myself becoming transparent, less solid. As if the bells are converting me into resonance too, slowly shifting my frequency away from the normal range of material existence. I can see them now, during the day. The 12 robed figures. They're always there, standing in their circle around the church, though most people walk right past without noticing. But I notice. I see them becoming more solid while I become less so. Last night, during the 3 deliberate tolls, one of them spoke to me. Not aloud, but in a voice that resonated directly in my skull. The frequency is almost correct. When it reaches 427.83 eshes for 18 seconds, the way will be open, will be released. And someone must take our place. Someone must become the new anchor. The bells require 12, always 12. 11 are here. We've been waiting for the 12th. I understood then. They hadn't been trying to scare me away. They'd been calling me, drawing me closer, teaching me the pattern through dreams and visions, preparing me to join their circle. I could run, leave town, go far away, hope the resonance fades with distance. But I don't think it works that way. I've been marked, identified, tuned to their frequency. Wherever I go, I'll hear the bells. I'll feel the resonance. I'll continue to thin until I'm no longer fully present in this world. Or I could go to the church, stand in the circle, let the bells ring through me. Become the 12th, complete the pattern, open the way fully. Release the 11 who've been trapped for 23 years. And then, spend the next decades as they have, caught between frequencies, waiting for someone else to hear the bells and take my place. I don't know what I'm going to do, but it's Tuesday night now. Almost midnight, and I can already feel the bells beginning to ring, even though I'm sitting in my living room 3 blocks away. The vibration starts in my chest, spreads through my ribs, makes my teeth ache. 12 deep tolls, each one marking not an hour but a position in the circle. Each one representing someone who answered the call and couldn't escape it. The oppressive silence falls. In it I can hear all 12 voices speaking in unison. Join us. Complete us. The frequency is ready. All that's needed is one more. Just one more. 3 deliberate tolls begin. My body resonates with each one. My vision doubles, triples, showing me this room as it is, as it was, as it will be, and as it exists at that other frequency where the 12 stand waiting. I'm standing up, walking to the door. My hand is on the doorknob. I don't remember deciding to move, but here I am, moving anyway. The resonance has a gravity all its own. It pulls you toward it, gradually at first, then inevitably. Outside, the street is empty. No cars, no people, no signs of normal life. Just the moonlight making everything silver and strange. And at the end of the road, the church waits, its bell tower dark, except for 12 points of light arranged in a circle. Not lights, I realize as I walk closer, eyes. 12 sets of eyes, all focused on me. I'm at the church now. The circle of robed figures stands before me. Up close, I can see that they're not quite there. They flicker and phase, existing in multiple states simultaneously. Solid and transparent, present and absent, alive and dead. There's a gap in the circle, a space exactly my width, the 12th position. One of the figures extends a hand, offering something, a bell, small, brass, old, warm to the touch, as if it's been held by many hands across many years. I take it. The moment my fingers close around it, I feel the full weight of what I'm doing. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about the pattern, the ritual, The thing that's been waiting on the other side of frequency for 23 years. Waiting for the way to be opened fully and permanently. But I also understand something else. The 11 who've been trapped here haven't been suffering. They've been protecting. Holding the way partially open, but not completely. 12 were needed to open it fully. And they've kept themselves at 11 deliberately, preventing the final resonance. They died trying to close the way. And when that failed, when they found themselves converted into anchor points, they chose to remain incomplete. To sacrifice themselves to keep the way from opening fully. Until now. Until me. Until they had no choice but to call for a replacement because the frequency was degrading and they could no longer hold it stable alone. Don't. One of them whispers, and I realize with shock that it's a warning, not a command. Don't complete the circle. Let us fade. Better that than. But the voice cuts off as the bells begin to ring. Not from the tower, from all of us. From the 11 gathered here, their bells invisible but their resonance clear. And from my bell, which I'm ringing now, though I don't remember raising my arm, the pattern builds. The frequency rises. The air between us begins to shimmer and thin, and through that thinning, I can see into the space beyond space where something vast and hungry has been waiting. It recognizes me, acknowledges me, welcomes me, and I understand, finally, what the ritual actually does. It doesn't open a way for us to see them. It opens a way for them to see us, to perceive us at a frequency that allows them to reach through, to touch, to feed. The 12 deaths in 1999 weren't an accident. They were a sacrifice. The congregation had given themselves to feed it, hoping that would satisfy it, that it would close the way. But it hadn't worked. It never works. Hunger like that cannot be satisfied. It can only grow. My bell is ringing in perfect synchronization with the others now. The pattern is complete. The frequency has reached 427.83 A's. 18 seconds begin to count down in my awareness, though I have no way of measuring them. The figure nearest me, the one who tried to warn me, reaches out and touches my hand. The touch is cold, insubstantial, but it conveys meaning more clearly than words. I'm sorry. We called for help, not for another victim. But the frequency required completion. It forced us to call, forced you to answer. This is what it does. This is how it spreads. City by city, town by town, 12 by 12. 18 seconds pass. The way opens fully, and I see them. All of them. Not just the one that's been anchored to this church, but thousands, millions, an infinite array of beings that exist at frequencies we were never meant to perceive. They're beautiful and terrible and utterly alien, and they're all aware of us now, all looking through the opening we've created. The bells continue ringing. Will continue ringing forever, now that the pattern is complete. Every night at midnight, 12 tolls followed by silence, followed by 3 deliberate rings. Calling, opening, letting them see through. I take my place in the circle. The 12th position, the anchoring point. And I begin to understand that I'll stand here for years, decades, until either I fade completely or someone else hears the bells and comes to take my place. 12 is the pattern. 12 is required. 12 will always be found. The robed figures around me are relieved. Not happy, how could they be, but relieved. They've held this position for 23 years, preventing the frequency from stabilizing fully. Now, with 12 again, the burden is distributed. We'll hold this way open at its current size, preventing it from expanding, but unable to close it. Unless we can find a way to break the pattern. Unless we can discover what the original congregation missed in their calculations. Unless we can figure out how to close the way permanently. But that will take time, study, understanding. And meanwhile, we stand here night after night, ringing our bells, holding the frequency, keeping them at bay. It's not heroism. It's not sacrifice. It's simply what happens when you hear bells that shouldn't be ringing and can't stop yourself from listening. The church stands silent in the daylight, abandoned, forgotten, just another relic of a dying town. But at night, if you listen carefully, you'll hear the bells. 12 deep tolls at midnight. Silence that's too complete. 3 deliberate rings that make your bones resonate. And if you're unlucky enough, or perhaps lucky enough, depending on your perspective, to really hear them, to feel them in your chest and see the patterns in your dreams, then you'll find yourself walking toward the church, despite every intention to stay away, because the bells are always calling, always searching, always needing 12. And when one of us finally fades completely, when the frequency can no longer sustain our anchor point, the bells will call again. They'll find someone new, someone who notices things, someone who listens, someone like you perhaps. If you're reading this, if you found this account, then you're already listening more carefully than you should. You're already paying attention to things most people overlook. And on some Tuesday night, walking home after midnight, you'll hear bells that shouldn't be ringing. You'll tell yourself you're imagining it, that old buildings make strange sounds, that there's a rational explanation. But deep in your chest, your bones will begin to resonate. And you'll know, the way I knew, the way the 11 before me knew, that the bells are calling specifically for you. You could run. You could try to escape. But the frequency has already found you. It's patient. It's inevitable. And somewhere, in a church that shouldn't have anyone inside it, 11 figures stand in a circle with a gap exactly your width. Waiting. Always waiting. The bells will ring tonight. They ring every night. And one night, sooner or later, you'll find yourself standing in that circle, a brass bell in your hand, completing the pattern, becoming the 12th. Welcome. We've been expecting you. Story 13. Mr. Aldrich was dying, and he wanted to tell me something. I'd been his hospice volunteer for 3 months, visiting twice weekly to read to him, adjust his pillows, or simply sit in companionable silence as the afternoon light filtered through his bedroom curtains. He was 93, his body failing incrementally, but his mind remained sharp, painfully so, according to his daughter, who'd hired the hospice service when she could no longer bear the weight of his presence alone. He knows too much. She'd told me during our first meeting, her hands twisting a tissue into shreds. He remembers things that should be forgotten. It exhausts him. It exhausts everyone around him. I hadn't understood what she meant then. It was a Tuesday in late October when everything changed. I arrived at my usual time, 2 in the afternoon, letting myself in with the key Mrs. Aldrich had provided. The house smelled of old books and lavender, that particular scent of elderly homes, maintained with fastidious care against inevitable decay. Mr. Aldrich was awake, propped up against his pillows, his watery blue eyes fixed on the doorway as if he'd been waiting for me. Which, I suppose, he had been. "Close the door," he said before I could greet him. His voice was stronger than usual, urgent. "And lock it. We don't have much time." Something in his tone made me obey without question. I turned the lock, the click seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Mr. Aldrich, are you feeling all right? Should I call?" "I'm dying," he interrupted. "Not today, probably not this week, but soon. Very soon. I can feel it. The weight is lifting." He gestured at a chair beside his bed, said, "Please, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interruption. Can you do that?" I sat, my hands folded in my lap, suddenly aware of my own heartbeat. 67 years ago, he began, I did something unforgivable. I was 26, full of ambition and arrogance, working as an assistant to Professor Whitmore at the university. He was studying local folklore, collecting stories from the oldest families in the region. Most of it was nonsense, tall tales and superstition. But there was one story that interested him particularly, a story about a curse. He paused, his breath rattling slightly. I reached for the water glass on his nightstand, but he waved me away. The story went like this: 300 years ago, this region was settled by a religious community. Strict, isolated, convinced of their own righteousness. They were led by a man named Isaiah Crown, who claimed to speak directly with God. Under his leadership, the community prospered for a time, but Crown grew paranoid. He began to suspect that evil had infiltrated his flock. He instituted tests, trials, examinations of faith that grew increasingly brutal. The Mr. Aldrich's eyes were distant now, seeing not me but something far away and long ago. Eventually, Crown identified 13 families he claimed were corrupted. 13 bloodlines tainted by darkness. He gathered the entire community and pronounced his judgment. These families would bear a curse. Their descendants would carry the mark of their ancestors' sins. Each generation would know suffering, would carry the weight of accumulated guilt, would never find peace until they acknowledged their evil and repented. "That's horrible," I whispered, forgetting my promise not to interrupt. "It gets worse," Mr. Aldrich said. Crown performed a ritual, a perversion of religious ceremony. He spoke words that shouldn't be spoken, invoked powers that shouldn't be invoked. And the curse took hold. The 13 families were driven from the community. Many died that first winter. But some survived, and they had children, and those children had children. The curse passed down, generation to generation. He shifted in his bed, wincing. Professor Whitmore was fascinated by this story. He tracked down descendants of those original 13 families. He interviewed them, collected their accounts, and he found something remarkable. They all described the same experience. A weight they carried, a sense of inherited guilt, dreams of events they'd never witnessed, memories that weren't their own. Mass delusion, I suggested. The power of suggestion. "That's what I thought too," Mr. Aldrich said. "That's what I told the professor," but he disagreed. He believed the curse was real. More than that, he believed he could prove it. And he needed my help. The afternoon light was fading, shadows gathering in the corners of the room. I should have turned on a lamp, but something kept me still, listening. Whitmore had obtained something from his research. A book. An original document from Isaiah Crown himself, describing the ritual he'd performed. The professor's theory was that if the curse could be enacted, it could also be reversed. He wanted to gather descendants from all 13 families and perform a counter ritual, a way to lift the burden. "And you helped him?" I asked. "I did more than help him," Mr. Aldrich said, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "I convinced him to let me perform the ritual. I was young, ambitious. I saw it as my chance to make my mark, to contribute something meaningful to his research. So one night, in an abandoned church outside town, we gathered 14 people, 13 descendants, one from each cursed family, and me to perform the ritual." He closed his eyes, his face contracting with remembered pain. I read the words from Crown's book. I followed his instructions precisely, and at first, nothing happened. We stood there in the darkness, feeling foolish. The descendants began to leave. But then, he opened his eyes, and I saw fear there, raw, undiluted terror. Then the weight transferred. "What do you mean?" "The curse didn't lift," he said. It moved. From them to me, I felt it happen, like a physical sensation, like chains wrapping around my chest and tightening. All at once, I was carrying the accumulated guilt of 13 families, 300 years of suffering and sin and sorrow. It nearly killed me on the spot. His breathing was labored now, each word an effort. Professor Whitmore tried to reverse it. He performed the ritual again, backwards, with different words. But nothing worked. The curse had found a new vessel, me, and it's been with me ever since. I didn't know what to say. This was clearly the delusion of a dying man, a story his deteriorating mind had constructed. And yet something in his eyes, in his absolute conviction, made me hesitate. The 13 families were freed, he continued. I checked on them over the years. All of them reported the same thing. The weight had lifted. The dreams had stopped. They felt human, unburdened. I had succeeded in lifting their curse, but I'd taken it on myself. Mr. Aldrich, I said gently, curses aren't real. What you're describing sounds like. Like what? He interrupted, his voice sharp. Mental illness, guilt, psychological trauma. Believe me, I've heard every rationalization. I've seen every doctor, every therapist, every specialist. None of them could help because none of them understood. The weight is real. The memories are real. Every single day for 67 years, I have carried the sins of 13 families. He reached out suddenly, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. Do you know what it's like? To remember things you never experienced. To feel guilt for actions you never committed. To carry the weight of 300 years of suffering in your own body. His grip was painful, his eyes boring into mine. I remember a woman named Sarah Crown, no relation to Isaiah, who was accused of witchcraft and drowned herself rather than face trial. I feel her lungs filling with water. I remember a child, barely 6 years old, beaten to death by his father who believed the boy was possessed. I feel every blow. I remember betrayals and murders and cruelties beyond counting, and I carry the guilt for all of them. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Mr. Aldrich, you're hurting me. He released me immediately, slumping back against his pillows. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. That's all I ever say anymore. Sorry for things I didn't do. Sorry for being born. Sorry for taking on this burden. He laughed bitterly. The curse is very thorough. It ensures you can never forget, never stop feeling, never find peace. Why are you telling me this? I asked, rubbing my wrist. Because I'm dying, he said simply. And when I die, the curse will need a new vessel. That's how it works. It passes to whoever is closest to the cursed person at the moment of their death. Someone who has touched them, connected with them, opened themselves to the possibility of belief. My blood went cold. That's not going to happen, isn't it? He studied my face. You're already feeling it, aren't you? The weight beginning to press down on your shoulders. The sense that something is wrong, fundamentally wrong with the world. Small memories that don't belong to you, floating at the edges of your consciousness. No, I said firmly. I'm not feeling anything except concern for your mental state. But even as I spoke, I realized it wasn't entirely true. Over the past few weeks of visiting Mr. Aldrich, I had been having strange dreams. Nothing clear, just fragments. Old buildings I'd never seen. Faces I didn't recognize. A persistent sensation of being watched or judged. I'd attributed it to stress, to the emotional weight of hospice work. Now, sitting in his darkening room, I felt something else. A pressure, subtle but growing, like the atmospheric change before a storm. You chose this room, Mr. Aldrich said quietly. Out of all the hospice volunteers, you specifically requested to work with me. Do you remember why? I did remember. I'd seen his file, his age, his situation, the note about him being a challenging patient. Something had drawn me to his case, a sense that he needed help that others couldn't provide, that I was meant to be here. "That's the curse," he said, reading my expression. "It seeks out its next carrier. It finds someone who will listen, who will open themselves to the story. Someone with empathy and curiosity and just enough belief in things beyond the rational world." "This is insane," I said, standing up. "I need to leave." "You can leave," he agreed. "But it won't matter. The connection is already made. When I die, tomorrow or next week or next month, you'll feel it. The weight will transfer. And you'll spend the rest of your life carrying what I've carried." I moved toward the door, my hand on the lock. "Unless," he added, and I froze. "Unless what?" "Unless you do what I should have done 67 years ago. Break the cycle." I turned back. "How?" "You have to find them," he said. "The 13 families, their descendants. You have to tell them the truth, that I took their curse, and now it's looking for a new home. And you have to warn them that they're not truly free. The curse doesn't disappear, it only moves. If they don't want it to return to them, they need to help you." "Help me do what?" His eyes were sad. "End it. Completely. There's a way, but it requires all 13 families to participate. They have to perform a ritual together, a true counter, ritual that destroys the curse rather than transferring it. Professor Whitmore found references to such a ritual before he died, but I never pursued it. I was too afraid, too guilty. I felt I deserved to carry this weight. "And you think I can convince 13 families to perform some kind of occult ritual?" I asked incredulously. "I think you'll do whatever it takes to avoid carrying this curse," he said. "Once you feel it, truly feel it, you'll understand. You'll move heaven and earth to be free of it." I unlocked the door and opened it, letting the light from the hallway spill into the dim room. "I'm going to call your daughter. You need your medication adjusted." "My daughter knows the truth," he said. "Why do you think she can barely stand to be in the same room as me? She's felt it too, just from proximity. The weight leaking out like radiation. She's terrified she'll be the one near me when I die." I left without another word, walking quickly down the hallway and out of the house. The October air was cool and crisp, gloriously normal. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, hands shaking, trying to process what had just happened. Mr. Aldrich was delusional. That was the only rational explanation. The stress of dying had fractured something in his mind, and he constructed an elaborate fantasy to give meaning to his suffering. But that night, I dreamed. I was a young woman, not me, someone else wearing my consciousness, standing in a town square that no longer existed. Men in archaic clothing surrounded me, their faces hard with righteous anger. They were accusing me of something, but I couldn't hear the words over the sound of my own heartbeat. Someone grabbed my arm, dragging me toward a wooden platform. There was a rope. There were prayers being spoken in loud, fervent voices. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. Just a nightmare, I told myself, brought on by Mr. Aldrich's disturbing story. But the next night I dreamed again. A different scene, a different era, but the same feeling of crushing guilt and helpless terror. And the next night, and the next, I stopped visiting Mr. Aldrich. I called the hospice agency and requested a transfer to a different patient. They were understanding. Sometimes volunteers and patients simply weren't compatible. But the dreams didn't stop. If anything, they intensified. And during my waking hours, I began to feel it, the weight. Subtle at first, just a vague heaviness in my chest, a persistent sense of having forgotten something important. But it grew stronger day by day. I started researching. Late at night, unable to sleep, I searched for information about Isaiah Crown, about the 13 families, about curses and rituals, and the transfer of spiritual burdens. Most of what I found was nonsense, but occasionally I'd stumble across something that felt true. A mention of Crown's community, a reference to families driven out in the 1720s, historical records that aligned too perfectly with Mr. Aldrich's story. 2 weeks after my last visit, his daughter called me. "He's asking for you," she said, her voice strained. "Days, maybe hours. He says there are things he needs to tell you. Names, locations, information you'll need." "I'm not coming," I said. "Please," she begged, and I heard desperation in her voice. "If you don't come, if you're not there, it might pass to me. I'm his daughter. The blood connection is even stronger, please." So I went. Mr. Aldrich looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by his approaching death. But his eyes were alert, focused. When I entered, he managed a weak smile. "You feel it now," he said. Not a question. "Yes," I admitted. There was no point in lying. "Sit," he said. "I have the names of the 13 families. I have addresses for as many descendants as I could track down. And I have instructions. Everything Professor Whitmore learned about the true counter ritual." He gestured to a leather journal on his nightstand. "It's all in there. Everything you'll need. Some of the families will remember their history. Others have forgotten. You'll have to convince them. You'll have to make them believe." I picked up the journal. It was heavy, filled with decades of cramped handwriting. "Why me?" I asked. "Why did you choose me to carry this?" "I didn't choose you," he said gently. "The curse did. It always finds someone who can bear it. Someone strong enough to carry the weight, but compassionate enough to care about ending it. That's you." "I don't want this," I whispered. "Neither did I," he said. "But we don't always get to choose what we carry. We only get to choose what we do with it." He closed his eyes then, his breathing slowing. I sat with him through the afternoon and into the evening, watching the light fade, feeling the weight in my chest grow heavier with each of his labored breaths. His daughter stood in the doorway, unwilling to come closer. "Thank you," she mouthed at me. Whether in gratitude or apology, I couldn't tell. Mr. Aldrich died at 11:47 p.m. The moment it happened, I felt the full weight slam into me. Not gradually, not gently, but all at once like a physical blow. 67 years of accumulated curse, 300 years of inherited guilt, 13 families worth of suffering and sin and sorrow. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I could only feel every memory, every regret. Every moment of pain experienced by people I'd never met across centuries I'd never lived through. I understood then why Mr. Aldrich had looked so tired. Why his daughter could barely stand to be near him. This wasn't something a person could carry and remain whole. I don't know how long I sat there, drowning in sensation and memory. Eventually, his daughter touched my shoulder, briefly, fearfully, and I managed to stand, to walk out of the room, to drive home, though I have no memory of the journey. The journal sits on my coffee table now. I've read through it 3 times, memorizing the names, studying the instructions for the ritual. Tomorrow, I'll begin reaching out to the 13 families. I'll tell them the truth. I'll beg them to help me, because Mr. Aldrich was right. I'll do whatever it takes to be free of this weight. And if I can't convince them, if the ritual fails, then I'll do what he did. Carry this burden until I'm dying, until I can pass it on to someone else who might succeed where I failed. The curse is patient. It survived 300 years. It will survive longer still. But tonight, lying in bed with the weight of centuries pressing down on me, feeling the guilt of 13 families flowing through my veins. I can't help but wonder, what if the curse can't be broken? What if this is simply what it means to be human? To carry the sins of those who came before, to feel the weight of history in our bones, to inherit guilt we didn't earn. What if we're all cursed, and some of us just feel it more acutely? Outside my window, I can hear the October wind rustling through dead leaves. Inside my head, I can hear voices from 3 centuries ago, whispering their regrets. And I know that sleep, when it finally comes, will bring only dreams of lives I never lived and deaths I never died. The weight is mine now, and tomorrow the work begins. And with that, our time tonight comes to an end. To everyone who stayed until the very last moment, thank you, truly. Having you here, sharing these shadows, makes the darkness feel a little less empty. I'm grateful you chose to spend a piece of your night here with me. I hope these stories brought you that quiet shiver, the kind that makes you feel alive. There's something special about this, all of us, connected by the love of a good story whispered in the dark. I'll be back soon with more echoes from the void, more mysteries waiting to be told. Until then, rest well, sleep deeply, and if you hear footsteps that shouldn't be there, just remember, they're only stories. Oh, and before you drift off, if you enjoyed our time together, a like and a subscribe will make sure we meet again, somewhere in the dark. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.